It's more of a hopeful agenda.
Sorry, Ben, did you hear me?
Are we live?
You are alive.
All right, thank you very much, everyone. Pardon the 8-minute delay. I am the Chairman, Ben Sale, of the Planning Commission for the City of Annapolis, and I'd like to welcome everyone to the virtual public meeting Thursday, March 4th, 2021, with a start time of 7:09. My apologies. I'd like to call this meeting to order. Tammy, can we go ahead and get a roll call?
Mr. Sale,
Here.
Mr. Waltman,
Present.
Mr. Klein,
Present.
Ms. Butler,
Present.
Mr. Imes.
Here. Did you not hear me?
I'm done.
Okay.
I'll turn it back over to you, Mr. Sale.
I think he may be frozen.
I was having a little bit of delay there. Tammy, could you confirm for me one more time that we had the quorum and your potential roll call?
Yes, we have a quorum.
Okay, thank you much. Thank you. We'll get a bit, I'm sure it's on my end. Is anybody else seeing that? Okay. Can you hear me fine? Tammy, just confirm that for me that you're hearing fine, unbroken.
You're very broken for me.
You're kind of choppy, yeah.
And you're broken. You're broken.
Okay, give me 1 second here. All right, the approval of minutes from the last meeting, which would have been a month ago for February 18th. Does anyone have any issues with the minutes that were provided?
There was no meeting.
And I will not present those. Say that again, please.
There was no meeting on February 18th.
It was February 4th.
February 4th.
Sorry, not February 18th. It would be the February. I'm going to get my dates here. Be February 4th. When we heard the updates. Does anybody have any issues with the February 4th meeting minutes that Tammy sent out? Do you need to see those right now?
I'll make a motion to approve as distributed.
Issues abound.
I will second.
Okay. We have a second. All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed?
Aye.
Okay. Maybe I called that vote a little bit too early. Did you have something to say that I didn't hear because of my technical difficulty, Diane? Diane, did you have something that you wanted to amend to those minutes?
No. And I seconded the motion to approve. Can you hear me?
You're pretty choppy.
Everybody's.
I can hear you, but broken. Alex, can you give me a quick comms check? Can I hear you just fine? Can you talk, say something?
Test 1, 2, 3. How do I sound on?
Uh,
How do I sound?
Front?
You sound good to me.
I hear you just fine.
Can everyone hear me?
It's going to get a little better. I can hear you.
Okay.
Alex, could you hear Diane?
In the motion
No.
to the minutes? Oh, no.
Okay, Diane, try one more time to say what you're going to say. And if it's too broken, we're going to have you reset.
Okay, I'm going to, I seconded the just go
Due to technical difficulty and at the moment,
It's-
until we can get Diane clearly on board. Diane, can you try to call us through back into the meeting through your cell phone?
So just,
Chris Beard, I seem to have you loud and clear. Do you have me loud and clear as well?
yes. Can I read meeting here?
Yeah, because
You're loud and clear.
I'm doing.
Okay, thank you, Chris. And I have you loud and clear and your video is perfect. Diane, I really think it's on your end. If you can log off and then call back in through your cell phone or something, that would work. Hopefully that would mitigate the problem we're having.
Yep, I'm trying to do that right now. So go ahead and just start the meeting. I was actually seconding the motion to approve the minutes, so I'm fine with that. If you want to go ahead.
Oh, yeah, your signal is much better now.
Your
Okay,
sound
great. I just had to switch to my cell phone. Thank you.
Yeah, Ben's video is really delayed for me, but he sounds okay.
Yes. Okay, so Diane, could you state again your comments with regards to the minutes?
Yes, I would like to second the motion to approve the minutes from February 4th.
I think I already did that a while ago.
Okay, I think we did it at the same time, so
Okay,
I think his motion overrides mine when there's a tie.
whatever. I don't care.
Okay. All right, so we have a motion and a second. All those in favor of the minutes from February 4th as written, say aye.
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 Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, motion passes unanimously. Moving on to new business. Also, I probably should have done this earlier, but I wanted to add some items to new business and rearrange order of public hearings. I'm going to propose a modification to sections D and E of the agenda for new business. We have comprehensive plan update, which we'll make really quick. And then after that, I'd like to talk about procedure for keeping hearings open with Alex's comments from the last meetings we had. So we'll add that as item number 2 under new business. And also under E, public hearings, we'd like to move number 4, the MPDUs, to the first item to be heard in public hearings so we can knock out those quick, easy items before we roll into the big projects. So that is my motion for modifying section D and E of the agenda. That's a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
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 Okay, motion passes. Section D, new comprehensive plan, followed by procedure. And then section E will have item number 4 moved to be the first item. All right, let's proceed on for new business for the comprehensive plan update from the city staff. And if we could please make that as
Yeah, we will. Let me go ahead and share my presentation here. Hopefully everybody can see this. Thanks for another chance to be in front of you all. well, we will make this brief. We have about 8 slides. I'm here with Chris Jakubiak, one of our consultants on the comprehensive plan. The real intent of this short presentation is to give you an update on how we're projecting growth in the city. Our projection of growth from 2020 to 2040. This is something that we're mandated to do by the state as part of our comprehensive plan. So you can find past projections. And I'm going to hand things over to Chris in a moment. I just wanted to go through a couple introductory slides. Let's see if we can get this to move. Quick revisiting of our schedule, mostly on track here. We're working, getting content together on the draft comp plan. We have another city council work session scheduled for early April. And so we're planning to have goals and recommendations to share at that. We have a couple pieces in the comp plan that might end up pushing the schedule. The case studies that we're doing for the land use chapter could end up needing more time to do some engagement around those. But I'm happy with the progress so far. Let's see. So we've met with you all a few times now to talk about our approach to land use. A lot of that is in anticipation of growth. We're trying to be proactive in how we leverage our land in the city. And the growth projection is something that is pretty critical to the comprehensive plan. It is impacting a number of other pieces of the comprehensive plan. Just try to summarize those here. I think one of the most important ones is community facilities. It's obviously a hot topic in the city right now with our adequate public facilities ordinance being updated. We need to make sure that we have the resource to accommodate growth and thinking about where growth should happen in the city is part of the comprehensive plan, to be sure, and that's something that we're going to be expanding on. There are a number of benefits that we could be anticipating with growth of new households in the city. Trying to summarize that here briefly. A lot of this should be straightforward, but I think it's important to recognize that there will be growth. There are developable parcels throughout the city that will change. We're trying to, as a city, with our comprehensive plan, we're trying to be proactive in what kind of growth we'd like to see and what kind of benefits we're looking for. So we're trying to align our growth projection with the vision for the city that we put forward in the comprehensive plan. I'm going to hand things over to Chris Jakubiak in a moment. Chris, do you want me to stay on this slide at all, or should I go ahead and into the methodology?
Let's go to the next slide, and
Okay.
I'll just give you a heads up when we can switch.
Okay.
And in deference to the tight schedule, I will move fast, and I guess we can anticipate if you have any questions or comments, you can get back to us.
Yeah,
Yes.
we can share this presentation as well. It might require some more digesting on your end after this.
No one's good at predicting the future, and ironically, planners are typically not the best at doing this. And our job is not to really predict the future, but to give some alternative projections. It's likely that the city's projection will fall within a certain range. And we provided five ways of looking at future growth here, 1 through 5. One is based on the Baltimore Metropolitan Council, and number 5 is based on the trends from 1990 to 2018. So the lowest projection is leads the city with 16,843 households in 2040, and the highest projection leaves us with 18,310 households. These are households. There's a reason why we look at households, not population, but that's not germane tonight. So there's a relatively narrow range. It's roughly 1,450 is roughly the difference between these. And that's really not a lot given the base that we're working with. So that's an important point right there. I don't think we're going to be exploding growth. There is some growth that's going to happen because the region is growing, the county is growing, and there's developable land. Next. Let's just skip this one, Eric.
Okay, sure.
This is a graph that shows those trends. And when you have time to look at it, you can, you basically see that, in fact, this linear growth is, in fact, reflects previous trends. The BAE report, which is the Baltimore Metropolitan Council's report, really, it doesn't seem to make sense, but it's based on what happened in the 10 years before that. So it's basically a flat line projection moving into 2040. We know for obvious reasons, because if we looked at the trends, the actual building permits that are pending, the projects that are under construction, that the Baltimore Metropolitan Council number is no way accurate. We're going to be well above that. If you look at this graph, we're going to probably end up between the red line and the yellow line, in that range, probably closer to the orange. That's our thinking. Next.
Yeah, and I would just remind folks that the BAE report that we're talking about is the fiscal impact analysis that our other consultant BAE produced in the past year, and it was kind of agnostic in thinking about how we want to grow. I mean, it used the Baltimore Metropolitan Council's projections, but just basically assumed everything else to stay the same. So let's see.
And this slide there are a lot of things going on here, but the important thing is to look at what the city's population is relative to the county, because that share analysis, that percentage share, is often the most effective way of predicting the future at a small town or small city, regional kind of projection. And as you see, from 1990 to 2020, the city's share of the county's households has decreased from roughly 10% in 1990 to 7.6% in 2020. And it's reasonable to anticipate that it's going to continue. In fact, some of these projections lead us to conclude that reduction will continue. Scenario 4 and 5 show that reduction bottoming out at 7.6%. And we're not so keen on actually being accurate with this percent share, but we wanted to have a variety of alternatives that kind of get us to a reasonable range of alternatives. So I think we're going to be within this 7 to 7.6%. We can't really get much below 7%, because when you start getting lower and lower than that, mathematically results in a reduction of city population, and we're not about to project a reduction in city population. I just don't think that's realistic. Go ahead, next. So this is probably the most important part of it, because it speaks to the real planning that is happening. So we looked at, there's 5 projections. Now we're going to look at a forecast, and the forecast has more of a normative component. It's kind of what we want, or how we get there, or what's necessary, what steps would, how do we fill out that projection? And that's where the planning comes into place. If you look at the first row here, it shows points A, B, and C. Projects under construction, 417 units. Permits pending, 140. And the remaining infill capacity, that means the other lots that are either in not yet developed, that could be developed, or they're platted lots with no houses on them. That takes us to 1,000. I think it's reasonable to expect that points A, B, and C are going to come to pass over the next 20 years. In fact, 158 of the remaining infill capacity is already well on its way over the past year, and that's the Parole Plaza. I mean, so there's a big chunk of it right there off the bat. So I think this is a good enough planning number to suggest that we're heading into at least 1,000. Now we get to kind of the difference between 1,000 and the forecast numbers, which range from 1,600 to 1,800. How do we want to achieve that? One way, thinking as a planning model, is to focus on addressing that affordable housing goal that's in the housing element that we've drafted. Housing that's primarily for middle income workforce housing. And we really think that if that as a policy, the city aims to bring about increases, maybe 500, maybe 600, maybe 700, that's how you match up with the forecast. And we think this is probably a reasonable approach because some of the changes we've talked about in terms of redevelopment and making sure redevelopment is compatible with the context of its neighborhood, that effectively reduces what is allowed. For instance, the Eastport Lofts project, it's at the Eastport Shopping Center. It could be argued that's not necessarily compatible with that particular neighborhood in terms of scale and massing and impact. However, the zoning allows for it. But if we go forward and make adjustments to the plan and the zoning to make sure that projects are more compatible with their surroundings, it's going to reduce the amount of development that's driven by the market and open up opportunities elsewhere for the city to engage in more of a affordable housing planning approach. So I guess what I just want to say is that A, B, and C plus either D, D2, or D3 equals something pretty close to our forecast numbers. And this is just a strategy for how we deal with that forecast. And I'm certain that we will revisit this in future discussions with you when we have more time, because there's a lot embedded in these 4 slides that probably requires a good 30 minutes or so of discussion. And that's just from us to you. So, Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry if I went too fast, but I was trying to keep up. I know you have a very busy, important agenda.
Oh, no, it's appreciated. And I think we get the point. There's been a lot of work here on your growth projections, and I understand what's there. So anything that you want to pass if we had to take 2 or 3 big points away from this and how this is going to affect our getting the comp plan done, what would you say?
The city's going to grow, and growth, as Eric has pointed out, growth has real benefits. This whole planning process has been about being intentional about development or redevelopment, and we want to make sure we're intentional about the growth that happens too. There has to be a reason. So this last slide, indicates how we act intentionally over the next 20 years to derive some benefit from the growth that's likely to happen. So that's the most important thing. We're going to grow, and let's be intentional about it. And third point, we're not going to grow in any significant way. Those growth trends are gradual, steady upward, but not anything out of the ordinary that's happened over the past 20, 30, 40 years. In fact, it's actually somewhat slower.
I get it. And we put so much red tape in the way as a city that we slowly plan and get our developments like we like them, which is good for the community. Any other commissioners have questions or comments?
I'm just curious about the when we'll see these affordable housing goals. We don't have to go into it now. I'm just curious how that all looks. So something for another meeting.
Yeah, I would also say, I think another takeaway is that we really need to marry this with our future land use map that we've kind of sent iterations of or drafts of in previous presentations, but I think showing how we distribute this will be helpful, to kind of show where some of these new households would be going. And I think I just want to also say, with new housing, they won't necessarily go to people moving to Annapolis. I mean, they might go to people who are moving across town, and that would be great. So it's also something to be thinking about. We're trying to accommodate people who are already living in the city who may not be homeowners, and that's part of the emphasis on the sort of middle income housing.
Yep, devil's in the details, though.
Yeah.
Any other commissioners with comments?
No, this is great. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm actually thrilled that the numbers for targeting growth are more realistic than they were several months ago. So good job at revisiting that, and I think getting us closer to what we all thought would be the case when we originally looked at the numbers. Thank you.
Good to hear. Thank you.
Thank you, Diane, and you're crystal clear for what it's worth. And I've also reset myself. And if you go through the app versus going through the web browser, it significantly speeds up the data transfer. That was my issue. Okay, well, thank you for that from the city staff, and we'll move on to a quick talk about procedure.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, it was mentioned in the last since the last meeting and this one about procedure of leaving hearings open for an extended time, even when the developer may have said they'd be back in 3 weeks or so, specifically on the 103 Annapolis application. We heard that. We asked for some changes in regards to some trees, and that they were going to look at the plan and come back to us by the end of the month, and they didn't, and they've had an extended open window. And there was some concern and some questions asked by the group. And Tom Smith, we're going to bring you in here in a second, so get ready. But my opinion on the matter at the moment with what I know is that leaving projects open, as we've done in the past, until the developer is able to accommodate the changes we've requested, was a normal procedure we would go through. However, this time it's taking a little bit longer than usual. And there's been some questions from people about why we're doing that. Is it a good optic or not? And I want to open it up first to other commissioners to make comment, and then we'll ask some comments from Tom Smith and then back and forth. So Alex, anything to add to that?
Yeah, just since I brought it up, I think there's a lot to be said for leaving it open because it does reduce process. So if there's sort of some limited going to go just touch a few things up or got to go researching something, it makes sense to leave it open. But at this point, using that example, it seems like it's gone. We don't, we're not really even sure what's, what the reason that it's gone on so long. And I think, maybe it goes on like this for another couple of months and they come back with just a tweak, or maybe it comes back with something very different. And I think, in either one of those scenarios that sort of bookend the scenarios, I don't think it's proper to entertain large changes without essentially requiring a new process for a public hearing, mostly because of the notification to people who might be interested. And that's to me where the optics come in. If something radically gets changed with no new notice, people are going to say, well, there was a backroom deal. Not that I'm not implying that there is or isn't. It's just the optics. So that's why I brought it up.
Okay, any other commissioners with regard to that subject before we ask Tom Smith?
The only thing I would say is that I like having the projects heard, and then we vote on them closer in time, because frankly I just forget. if we spend too much time in between looking at the projects, then at our next meeting, even if there are just a few minor changes, we sort of have to spend a lot of time backing up and going over stuff. So it just, for me, is a convenience thing. But now that Alex has mentioned the optics, I sort of agree with that as well.
Okay. Go over to Tom Smith now. And Tom, my question to you, and you can answer more than this, is the benefits versus the pros and cons of having it open versus not open for an extended period And why would we want to keep it open versus not open? Because me personally, I see it as keep it open because it does, it makes it more efficient to me, man hours worked over the long run for everyone. But check me on that. What do you think?
It's a really good question, Mr. Chairman. And I think some of your commissioners, Alex in particular, he's got some really good point there. I'm inclined to agree with that. But of course, at this point, this project would have to be re-advertised anyway. So as far as big projects, leaving it open, the public should have an opportunity to come back and speak when projects have a major change when they're left open for so long. We don't have this very often, and maybe because of COVID, or maybe it's just this particular project. Usually when the commission has a question or looks for some alterations, usually an applicant comes back at the very next meeting, usually in a month, and has those corrections. So this is a bit unusual.
So perhaps you could explain what the criteria would be for something to have to be re-advertised. So you mentioned in this particular project, you think it does need to. So what are the criteria that would force that?
I'd have to actually double check with Kevin Scott. I think he's been the project leader on this, but my recollection was at the previous meeting, you typically state during the meeting that we're leaving it open until the next meeting. But I don't believe that was restated at that meeting, that you're leaving it open until yet the following meeting. In which case, if you didn't state that, then we want to re-advertise.
Yeah, that's correct. You stated to the specific date I forget all the timeframes at this point, but initially it was held open to a specific date. And then after that, it was held open indefinitely. So at that point, we have to re-advertise. So we only avoid re-advertising if the date is set at the hearing.
Okay. From my understanding of what we would have done and we're going to do is, also, Kevin, could you mute yourself when you're not talking because it seems to get feedback from the speaker?
Yes.
All right. Thank you. And the problem is solved. Thank you, Kevin. If we were going to, which we have left this item open, and understand the developer would come back with significant changes to the front of the structure, the sidewalk, the trees being removed or replanted. Based on what we would see from the developer, obviously that item, on my understanding, when it comes back changed, it still has to go through planning and zoning staff before it even gets back to us as a commission. So if they make changes to a project, it goes through Tom Smith and the gang, and then gets to us to be heard on that comeback. Now, a posting on the property, I would have guessed that probably wouldn't have happened. So we as a commission would then either have said, did it happen, did it not, and let's make it happen. I'm going to say right now, I'm leaning towards let's keep the project open unless, well, I'm not actually leaning that way. But the big ticket items are, is it going to be posted so the community knows about those changes, and is it going to be properly reviewed, those changes through planning and zoning and up to the planning commission? And it sounds like with Tom's and Kevin, it's going to be reviewed. Whether or not it's going to be posted, it sounds like Kevin said that as well. And I think the third item we would have to check now is, do we want to go ahead and close out the public hearing on this and come back to it, or keep it open? So back to you guys on your thoughts.
So I noticed that the applicant's attorney is in the waiting room on another application on this agenda. So they might be able to offer some insight to you as to the status. I don't know if that's why his hand is up. But you might ask them.
Let's go ahead and hear his comments. I think they'd be applicable.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. I can hear you, Stephen. Go ahead.
Great, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I was going to discuss this before we got into the merits of our STP before you tonight, but at this time, the application is being withdrawn. Kevin, I thought we had communicated that to you, so apologies if there was a lapse in communication, but it was determined.
And for clarity, which application?
This is for 101, 103. I think I remember the SDP number, but withdrawn, after the applicant got all its feedback, it was just deemed that it wasn't commercially viable. So any changes that happened to the project They're just going to be done through the building permit process, but there's going to be no major renovations at this point.
All right, to be clear on what I just heard, so the application will be withdrawn. So there will be no
It's
further
dead.
application at this time at all. It's not
Correct.
viable.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Has it been withdrawn yet, or is it still in process?
I thought we had communicated that, but if it hasn't formally been withdrawn, I'll be sure to do it first thing tomorrow morning.
Yeah, I just needed you to formally withdraw it. I mean, I
Yep, sorry about that. We'll do it.
I just need you to do it formally. That's all.
Yep.
Okay, and notifying the public from planning and zoning. It'd be nice if we could feed back to the public, other than just this meeting, that it actually is canceled, to give some notice the word gets spread around. We can talk about that later. But okay, thank you for that, Mr. Hyatt. Appreciate that information.
Absolutely, sure. Thank you.
Mr. Waldman, looks like you have something to say.
Well, I just want to just to bring it back to the level that Alex began it on the policy level, and that Kevin explained, that if it's postponed to a date certain, there's no re-advertisement necessary. If it is postponed indefinitely, there needs to be a re-advertisement. I think I got that right. And so in this case, if they had continued, they would repost and re-notice everybody, so that everybody would have a chance to see the revised plans and so forth. I'm summarizing what I've heard. Am I correct? Thomas?
Yeah. Yes,
Yeah.
Commissioner Waldman.
Okay. I just had one other question. In situations like this, if they come back with, say, a modification of the plan, but most of the engineering is still good, and a lot of things are left basically untouched, or do they need to submit an entirely new application, or can they in some way piggyback on a lot of the work that's been done so far?
They typically submit a revision to the current application.
Okay. All right. So that it can move more smoothly.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
So
All right.
if you're submitting a revision to the application, you're not reapplying. It's a revision. You've saved a lot of it's just a review of changes, I would think, and a re-notification, and we're posting it prior to the commission. It goes through planning and zoning. It seems like all the wickets are met.
Right. Most projects go through multiple revisions before they get to the commission. This one's a little unusual, where we're getting revisions during the commission.
Right.
I mean, I don't think it's unusual. I mean, we're the ones who demanded the changes. So as the commission, we've demanded these changes, and when they said they would come back by the end of the month, I was thinking, you got to be kidding me. You're going to make changes that quick? That's a lot of work, but okay.
But it is being withdrawn, so it would come back as a new application. If it were, they might recycle some of the engineering, but it would be a new application.
Right.
Okay.
Now, here's this is where another question. A lot of the public has put in a lot of time to make comment on the previous application. We get a new application, all of those comments, we have them heard in our mind, but they technically, I would think, can't be applied to the new application unless they're resubmitted. Would that be correct? Because it would be a whole new application. So
Absolutely.
and the public had to be known, but they're already in our minds. We've heard a lot from the public, and hopefully they would be notified, come back and do the same thing all over. So any other questions for commissioners, comments?
Yeah, just to circle back, I think it's going to be incumbent on us to use our judgment as to when we would, postpone to a date certain versus not a date certain. So essentially around the advertising requirement. So we have to use our judgment as to whether we think the change is, substantial enough that we'd want to trigger that re-notification or not. So that's just something we need to, as a group, keep in mind.
Well said. Any other comments? All right, thank you, Mr. Pline, for bringing that to our attention. Tom Smith, Mr. Hyatt, Kevin, for the edifying information. Moving on to item E, public hearings. We had moved item number 4 in E to the first one, which is NPDUs. So we could start off with the staff comments on that. Introduction.
Good evening.
Evening.
This ordinance 05030 is really kind of a cleanup of an ordinance that went through council about a year ago, 02119, that made some changes to Title 20 and how we do moderately priced dwelling units. When that section was changed, we accidentally did not change later parts of the ordinance that just need to be changed to be consistent with the earlier parts of the ordinance. So this is a cleanup to fix that. It also renames the trust fund and slightly streamlines the language of the trust fund and what we can use this money for. This is a fund of monies we used to collect when developers paid us a fee in lieu instead of the MPDUs. But this past ordinance 02119 made it so developers could not pay a fee in lieu. So, but we still have a little bit of money in that account. So that is, in essence, this legislation, pretty straightforward, but please let me know if you have any questions.
I do. Is anything else a financial feeder to that fund, or was it just the fee in lieu?
It was just the fee in lieu money.
So this fund will die relatively soon then?
Yes,
Okay.
within a year or two, unless there's a different source of revenue that gets assigned to it.
And that is not seemingly our duty. Okay, I have no further question for the staff. Anyone else?
I just had, yeah.
Go ahead. Go ahead, Alex.
So I had just had a question on the how I read the change in 2030-140 restrictions on rent and sale A to B. The way I read this is that if you if you sell it before the term is up, then I just want to make sure that I understand what that says. Maybe you can say it in something that's a little plainer language.
Could you say that section one more time?
So it's restrictions on resale and rent. It's 2B, A2B. It says upon the sale or transfer of
I
all
see.
or any portion.
Right, well, so the previous ordinance changed the time frame that that you need to hold on, that the unit needs to stay in MPDU from 10 years to 30, although that wasn't corrected here. So that's what the 30 is. And then from the date of the initial sale, there was just some confusion about when that time started. So we thought that date would be a little bit more clear than purchase of the property. So it is really just to make it, just to clarify it.
And then in the next one, 3, the way I read that is, say you go to 29 years and 6 months and then you sell it according to the restrictions, the clock as an MPDU starts again for another 30 years. So the clock resets when you sell it within 30 years. If you go past 30 years, then it's open market.
That's
how
right.
that works. But
That's
it does
right.
reset. It does reset. Starts another 30-year term if you
Right,
sell it
right.
at 29 years. and 6 months.
The housing stock,
I'm sorry.
to try and protect the MPD.
Yeah. No, I think it's good. I just want to make sure I understood it. Okay, that's it for me.
So I have a quick question regarding that. So the question I have is this 30 years, and I know you clarified this before. This is just for anything new, not for the. I know that we did a lot of MPDUs quite a while ago. West Street, a lot of things that have been done. Sailor's Quay. I don't think that we've done a lot recently at all. So I know that the ones on like the Upper West Street ones, they're probably like 7 or 8 years old now. They'll be falling off for people that haven't sold them yet, and they can sell them in 10 years. Is that correct, or they're grandfathered in, right? all the ones that we have. Do we have any in the pipeline coming up at all?
We have a few in the pipeline, like for Parole Place. Once that goes forward, they would be subject to these requirements.
Okay. But most of the ones we have are going to be rolling off in a couple years, probably,
If
right?
they're for sale.
If they haven't been sold in the first 10 years.
Right, the rental ones are, I believe, are stay rental for longer. But these are the for sale units.
Okay, that clarifies. I just want to be sure of that, to see where we stood.
Yeah, and if somebody, say there was a sale unit that was sold within 10 years and the clock resets, does it get reset to 10 or 30? Just out of curiosity.
Probably 10, because those were that was the agreement in place at the time.
Okay, so it's grandfathered fully. Okay, good to know.
I want to go back to the section that Alex brought our attention to. I don't know that I understand this. I own a property and I bought it for 100,000, and within 30 years I sell it for 200,000. It says that the seller shall keep the net proceeds, so I keep that the difference between what I paid and what I received.
Still got to sell at the MPDU price if it's within 30 years.
Right, you can't sell it for market value.
Right, but if the MPDU price goes up, you get to keep the difference. So you do reap some, if there is some increase in value, you get to realize that within the limits of the two endpoints of the MPDU prices.
Right.
That's how I read that.
Right.
Where's the section on setting an MPDU price?
I don't know if that is in this ordinance or if it's in Title 20.
It was like 216 at one point. It was a certain percentage or a certain amount.
That it would go up every year?
I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's based on some state formula.
Is there a restriction on rental value? So if you own an PDU and you want to get some money out of it, you turn it into a rental
You can't.
for an exorbitant price.
You can't, if you own it as a, if you bought it as an MPDU, you can't rent it during your time.
And if you do, you have to cough up that money to the trust fund. It's in there someplace too.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's not in this ordinance. It's not in what's been printed here. Because I don't see anything about setting sale or rental values.
That was in the last one that we did last year.
Okay,
This is
okay,
standing up.
all right. I'll accept that that's true. Because that's what makes sense. It could only work in that way. Okay, I'm fine. So we have a public hearing on this? Do we have to leave this open?
We're gonna have to open up public hearing here in a second. Is there any more questions from staff, from the commissioners?
And we did not receive any public comments from this.
I was just about to ask you that. Thank you for going ahead. So you clearly want to get the agenda over with. All right, we are now opening the public hearing on ordinance O-50-20 moderately priced dwelling units. And Dr. Nash, the Director of Planning and Zoning, has notified us that there's been no public comments received as of yet. We'll keep this open until the next meeting. And we also do not have anybody on board to talk about this at the moment. And correct me if I'm wrong, city staff, do we have anybody online? We should not.
No. Nobody signed up.
Thank you. Just wanted to get that on the record. And so now we will continue this open, leave this open till the next hearing. And that's all we have for today. So this item remains open and continuing.
And we have to put the staff report in the record.
Yep, the staff report dated February 23rd, 2021. Need to enter that into the record as an exhibit.
Thank you. Exhibit C1.
Exhibit C1. Thank you, Tammy. For I know not the jargon that you're able to create for each of these exhibit numbers. Thank you. Any other comments, last minute, commissioners, before we move on to the next item on the agenda? All right, moving on to item E, what was number 1, local zoning map amendment, which is a continuation, and the public hearing has been left open since our last commission meeting regarding for the purpose of correcting an error in the 2016 rezoning parcel 1340 grid 8. So Dr. Nash, any changes from the staff that we want to present or any comments that we want to present since the last meeting with regard to that?
No changes, no additional public comment. And still, I sent another letter certified mail, no response. So status quo.
Okay, we've sent, that makes it that we've sent 2 certified response requested, I believe, signature response requested to the owner. And could you state the owner name and where the rough name and where they're located? I believe it's in Colorado and it's a church group or a religious group of some sorts.
They're called Offices Christian Fellowship USA, and they are located in Colorado, Inglewood, Colorado.
Okay, and the property right now is it rented out or leased out?
Not that we know of.
Is it vacant?
I'm not sure.
Okay, can we be changing the zoning and the zoning that we would be changing would be commensurate with the use that's currently being used for?
Well, I would assume so, as this was the zoning it was before 2016, and it was the same, it's been the same owner that whole time.
Okay, so have we had anybody from planning and zoning go out there and see what's actually being used for?
No.
No, okay. Maybe we might want to do that in the future, I don't know. So there's been no public comment. There's been no comment or acknowledge of receiving the letters from the owner. And we have left this open more than 1 meeting. So the standard would be leaving it open to 1 additional meeting. We've left it open until 2 additional meetings, plus 1 canceled in there. So there's been a significant amount of time. I have no further questions of staff. Commissioners?
I do. I could barely recall this, but where is this property again? It's in the corner of what and what?
It's on Maryland Avenue near Cumberland Court.
I'll try to bring it up for you.
Between King George and Prince George.
Is it on Cumberland Court or on Maryland Avenue or?
No, it fronts on Maryland Avenue.
It's what?
It fronts on Maryland Avenue.
Okay. 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 I move that we approve this legislation or recommend to the city council that it be enacted.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. I'm trying to bring myself back to the proper screen. All those in favor, say aye.
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 Any oppositions? Any abstentions? No, the motion carries unanimously. ZMA 2021-001 and OTAC 47.20 local zoning map amendment. The Planning Commission recommends approval to the City Council for changing the zoning of that single parcel of property from a supposed error that we had made on the last rezoning in 2016 that went through City Council.
Thank you.
Any questions from staff or Tammy before we proceed on, or commissioners?
Well, only that you have to close the public hearing, don't you? Just a procedural issue.
Yes. Oh, well, okay. Well, the public hearing is closed. We had voted on that. I believe I'd said that earlier. I guess I didn't. So the public hearing was closed. We voted and here we are. So item is complete. Any other questions? I know, thank you very much. We will move on. We have 2 major site designs to get to. The first one is listed as item E2, SDP 2020-003 major site design plan review application by the City of Annapolis, care of Department of Public Works, for the proposed City of Annapolis Department of Public Works maintenance buildings, facilities, and surface parking lot on the property located at 39 Hudson Street. This is rescheduled to February 18th, and we will also have a public hearing with this item. So presenters start off with, I believe, staff. City staff.
Good evening, Mr. Chair. This is Kevin Scott, Senior Planner with Planning and Zoning. This major site design application is for the Department of Public Works Maintenance Facility at 39 Hudson Street. The zoning is I1. It's an industrial district, and it's about 6.88 acres. They're developing about 3.31 acres of the site, and it's to house the administrative offices for the Public Works crews, maintenance of the city fleet, storage of the city fleet, storage bins, salt barns. So all those public works options. It's the site that was to be the site of Absolute Fire, which was a similar industrial type use, but they found a location in the county instead. The city bought this property and worked on the plans to put the maintenance facility at this location. So we just took it to the Board of Appeals for the special exception, and the Board of Appeals has voted to approve the special exception. And now we're here before the Planning Commission for the major site design approval. I'll leave it to the applicant to give a detailed presentation.
Of the commission to the staff before we hear the presentation.
I have a quick question, Kevin. What was the special exception for?
Because it's in the use category of other government-related facilities and structures, it's a special exception, even though the same exact use by a private entity would have been permitted by right. But because it's government, it's a special exception. So we went through that review process with the Board of Appeals, and they granted approval.
Got it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions for the staff from commissioners? Okay, I'd like to move into the presentation by the Developing Application Authority. So let's go ahead and hear that.
Okay, well, good evening, Mr. Chairman and board members. My name is Mike Johnson, and I'm the Director of Public Works for the City of Annapolis. And this evening, we're glad to have the opportunity to present the plans for the new Public Works Maintenance Facility, which will be located at 39 Hudson Street in the City of Annapolis. This is a project that's had some history. It has been in the planning phase for quite a few years and was originally proposed to be constructed at the Spa Road location. And but after sort of careful consideration, the city decided to pursue other sites and determined that the Hudson site was a superior choice. This evening, we have all members of our technical design team, and we look forward to presenting it to you and answering any questions that may result from the presentation or that you had following your review of the plans. And I'll turn it over to Leo to take it from here.
Thank you, Michael. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen if I could.
Go right ahead, Leo. Good to see you again. This is a common occurrence.
I'm sorry we got bumped last time. It's unfortunate that we didn't get a chance to look at all of this at that point, but Mother Nature had different ideas for us. So I'm going to run through the presentation tonight and give you an overview kind of where we've been and what we're up to. And I'll try and do this as quickly as I can. And so we're going to start with, let's see if I can get this to go here. Can you just view full screen so you can see it best? How's that?
It was better before.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. Like that.
Perfect.
Okay, great. So what we have here is, as was described by Michael, the previous user was Absolute Fire Protection. They did a good deal of clearing on the site and had actually achieved a site design review and a grading permit for this property before they elected to look elsewhere. And so the city was able to take advantage of that opportunity and purchase the property. And we've been working on the development scheme for this property for some time now. And so you can see here that it's an irregularly shaped parcel. There's a component of it that's not cleared. And can you see my cursor there?
Yep. Yes.
Great. Access here goes out out to Hudson Street, which follows all the way out and goes out to West Street. It's located directly adjacent to Monarch Academy, and then also there's some more heavy industrial use on this surrounding properties. So that's where we are. I'm going to turn this over now to Terry Schumann to talk a little more about the civil components of it. And then we'll follow up with some commentary from, I believe, our landscape architect. And then finally, I'll talk a bit, and then we'll talk about the environmental issues and the energy efficiencies associated with the project at the end. And so with that, I'll turn it over to you, Terry, and you can tell me when you want me to move.
Sure. Good evening. My name is Terry Schumann, representing Bay Engineering. I'm glad to be part of the design team on this project. So this plan is the environmental constraints map. This is just a blow up of the subject property for tonight. And Leo mentioned before a couple other things I just wanted to mention. Hudson Street is a county-owned road. And we're right at the border. Our northern border and eastern border are the limits of the city of Annapolis, and everything north and east of us is in the county. This plan, what I wanted to show you, so there's a stream and a floodplain along that common boundary with Monarch Academy. And it's predominantly a wooded site, but that heavy dashed line was, again, absolute fire protection, went through, got a grading permit, and they cleared that area, set up sediment controls, mass graded that area before they, found another site and then eventually sold it to the city. So another feature just to be aware of, there's overhead lines on the eastern boundary there. So there's a 66-foot right of way and, major overhead electric lines that run along that and also across Route 50 there. Let's go. The other thought I just wanted to point out, this site is not, it's close, but it's not within the Chesapeake Bay critical areas. So it's outside of that. Let's go to the next slide. This slide is just it's a colored rendering of the proposed site plan that we're presenting tonight. Again, our access points will be off of Hudson Street. We have 2 access points. And then right off that first access point will be a visitor area for the admin building. And our building, we call this building number 1. That's the building there. The front part of that building is an admin building. It's a 2-story building. And then the rear of that building will be a repair facility for the fleet and some storage of some vehicles. And that will access off the rear. They'll have garage doors access. That's where they wash the vehicles and then do repairs on the vehicles. Just to the west of that, we call building number 2. That's a 1-story vehicle storage building. And then further to the west is the salt barn and the material bins. And then the surrounding pavement around all that is just for circulation, fleet vehicle parking, and traffic moving in and around the site. And I do want to point out, I think originally the city, we had a different layout way back when. We did have some meetings with the Environmental Commission, or the Public Works had some meetings. And at that point, we showed the salt barn, basically, right where Leo's pointing right now. We had the salt barn, the material bins right there, and there was some concern at those meetings about how close that was to the stream. So us as a design team in the Public Works, we did go back and realign the layout, and we put that material bin as far away as we possibly could, basically to the back end of the site and away from that stream. So we think it was they were good comments, and we think we have a better plan relocating those areas to the west. So let's go on to the next plan. This, I just wanted to talk about parking for this site. So again, the building the building part of it, the admin part and the visitor part, will require 25 parking spaces. And we show those with the teal and the colors. So the purple and teal colors are the visitor. That's a 25 parking spaces that handles the day-to-day admin staff and visitors. And then we have an 87 parks. The green areas are 87 parking spaces. That handles the what we call storage and the fleet vehicles. And the way we're handling the parking out here, everything will be done on site. So when a person comes in to start his shift, he will bring his vehicle, or maybe they'll carpool or take a bus or whatever they're going to do to get to the site. But if they bring a vehicle in, they will park a vehicle in the space where the car is, the fleet vehicle is parked, take that vehicle out for the day and replace their vehicle in that parking space. So at the end of the shift, they'll come back, replace it. So we will meet all our parking requirements on site, and no parking will be needed off site. So again, we have 112 total parking spaces, and 25 of them will be for the admin building itself. And again, we meet everything on site. Let's go to the next the next slide. So from a stormwater management standpoint, this is just a slide I wanted to present. Maybe Leo, maybe you can blow up the one corner up there. So again, we are new development. Back when Absolute did their plan, that was before the city went to 125% for new development. That grading permit is still active, and that grading permit we will continue to use. It's been transferred over. But in this, when the city came on board and bought that property, we did redesign these stormwater features. So we're going to meet the 125% that's required in today's code. That's the requirement for the state and the city requirements. So up in the upper off of Hudson Street, that's that visitor parking area. We do have a microbiome area up there. We're also proposing a green roof on top of the admin portion of the building. In the rear of the building, that's again, like I said before, where they're going to wash the vehicles and kind of what they call the hotspot area. We're going to propose a storm scepter, and the storm scepter is just the type of treatment that handles heavy industrial areas. It's a hydrodynamic circulation thing that settles all the heavy metals and everything else. It settles all that out and treats the hotspot area. In addition, for behind building number 2, we have a storm filter that uses carbon filters in a vault, and that will also be a hotspot treatment area. We have some microbiome areas in and around the perimeter of the site. And then over by the salt barn, I'll get into that in a second, but all this treatment comes down. It's basically a treatment train. Everything flows down again to the south and toward the stream. And it ends up discharging into the step pool stormwater conveyance system, which essentially is what I just said. It's a step pool. So it's made up of stone, sand, special soil, and boulders, and it just steps the runoff down, treats the runoff through the filtering, and gets it out to the outfall and discharge to the stream. So it's a whole treatment train from the top to the bottom, and treating all the runoff. Now, from the salt barn standpoint, as I said before, it's been a big concern. It's a big concern for many municipalities that do these salt treatment areas. So the de-icing salts are soluble in water, therefore filtering practices are really ineffective as far as treating them. So the best way to prevent the salts from entering the stream is a good source control. So the source control that we're proposing on this site, we're going to cover the salt barn. We're going to have a concrete pad we placed out front. It'll confine this runoff, confine the spills. We're going to have a trench drain at the inlet end of that salt barn, and any runoff in there will be directed toward a holding tank. And then the holding tank can pump it up to a brine system that they're proposing with the salt barn. And it's a good way to treat that runoff and reuse it and the treating of the salt inside the barn. It pre-wets it. They can also use it for anti-icing applications. And then in addition, the sweet, it's a good source control. So the city will, we provided that concrete pad out front there for sweeping of it during dry periods. And all of these measures will help prevent the salt from getting into the stream. So we think we have a good stormwater management plan, and hopefully you guys can agree. Let's go to the next one, Leo. The forest conservation, that's what this plan is, our preliminary forest conservation plan. It's been reviewed and approved to date. Like I said before, the absolute fire protection came in and cleared a portion of the property. With this program that we're proposing tonight, there is some additional clearing, so we will clear an additional ½ acre. That's represented in that teal color, right where the salt barns are. So we're gonna clear a ½ acre more of that. Then we have that dark brown or dark green area. That's all going to be reforested. That's going to be beyond a ½ acre. So we'll replace what we took out with additional reforestation. And then we also are proposing some street trees up along Hudson Street. And with all that said, we will exceed what we cleared, replant everything on site, meet the forest conservation requirements. And at the end of the project, that light green and dark green, as well as the floodplain, will all be placed in a conservation easement in perpetuity. So with the floodplain and the forest conservation easement, we're about 50% of the site will be in an easement and preserved. With that said, I think that covers pretty much what we were going to talk about as far as the site and stormwater goes. And I think, Leo, you're going to turn it over. I'll turn it back to you, and then you can get Deb.
Yeah, I'm just moving to the next slide here, and I'm going to let Deb Schwab talk a bit about our landscape plan.
Thank you.
I thought I was going to let Deb talk.
Okay, Bob?
About what?
You still in the meeting?
Yeah.
Terry, I'm not sure we have Deb here. I don't see her on our list, on our screen. Is there a miss here on my side?
Julian, she
Sorry,
Deb
Leo,
out in the waiting room.
I missed her. Yeah, she's coming forward now.
Well, I'm here. I've been here. So I guess I've been allowed back in. But I have lost Leo's. There it is. The landscape plan meets all the city requirements. Start there. The trees and plants we've used around the site are all native species except for a few under the BG&E lines. We've tried to design the plantings to be pretty tough so that the Department of Public Works won't go crazy trying to keep it alive and keep it looking good. And the what we used to call the coastal plain outfall, but we now call a step pool stormwater conveyance system, that's also planted with natives, as are the stormwater, all the microbio retentions. The one constraint we had on the site was the area that Terry told you about, which was the under the BG&E lines. And since we did do the site next to that, the plantings that have been planned for this site are meant to work with the plantings next door so that they are, it's like one seamless looking planting. And we also used plants that we knew that BG&E had approved on the site next to us because they do have a say in that. I don't think there's anything wild and crazy to tell you about it, except it meets the codes and it's mostly natives.
What do you want to tell us about the step ponds, pools?
Well, those are a regular stormwater conveyance system that's done in sloped coastal areas. Terry could tell you more about the technical part of that, but I think we've been doing these since about 2008 and 2009 on projects. And you use quite a variety of plants on those compared to a microbioretention, because you have 3 or 4 different kinds of regimes that you're dealing with. One, which is pools where water sit. You have areas where the water runs over rocks. And so you tuck the contractor has to kind of tuck plants into the gaps in the rocks. And then you have the side slopes that have different plants on them. And then because there's clearing done to put this in, we put some trees along the edge to recreate shade that was lost when the woods were cleared to put the system in. There actually is a second sheet where it's more detailed, but I don't know if it's part of the presentation.
Deb, I have a quick question.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a maintenance plan for the trees that are going to be held in the conservation easement?
The same maintenance that would be, I mean, there's a bond on anything that's planted with a 2-year bond.
Right. We're just looking at problems with long-term in different areas of the city right now where we have invasive species growing on trees, and there's no way to, we don't have the money to actually keep those trees alive once those invasives start.
Well, this is a city property, so that really is something that the city public works would need to work out with the city, really.
Right, but it's not part of what you do. We're just trying to think long.
And I didn't do the forest conservation work on this job. There's somebody different who did that. I really just did the landscape and stormwater. So the environmental consultant could probably talk to you more directly about that.
Great, thank you.
Kevin Haynes. This is Kevin Haynes. I prepared the forest conservation plan, and Kevin Scott can correct me, but most projects in the city are required to have a 5-year maintenance plan for their forestation planting.
Does that maintenance plan include devining?
Well, this is for the reforestation areas. So it's a general maintenance. There's general requirements, and I believe the city has the option to come in, inspect it, and request that things be remediated, including invasive species such as vines.
Are you familiar with the these agreements?
Yep. I mean, I've read through them.
Do they include the requirement that during the 5 years that they regularly devine?
There is not specific language about devining, but there is language about invasive species and removal of invasive species.
Well, I don't want to get involved in what's invasive and what's native, but I do know what a vine is. And I'm very concerned that, that it more than anything else, that the vines be removed until you've got at least 5 years of growth. Wouldn't be surprised if there's a condition placed on this that the maintenance agreement include devining through the entire 5 years. And it may increase the cost of the with your landscaping contractor, but it needs to become part of our regular language. And who, Mr. Haynes, who are you from? Are you with the city or?
Sorry, no, I'm private consultant, Holyoke Consulting.
Okay, all right. Well, you might not be the person to address this to. All right, let's keep going.
Are we taking questions, or can we direct questions to Terry?
I don't think they're even through the presentation entirely, but if it's a throwback, why not? I mean, if you need to.
Well, it's just quick. It gets to some of the things that we were just talking about in terms of the parking. Is there an area for the employee section of parking where there's going to be permeable pavers or pavement throughout the employee parking area?
So we did, this site is predominantly C and D soils. And honestly, the only logical place really to put permeable pavement with the type of vehicles and uses out there would be that visitor parking in the front.
Uh-huh.
And the problem with that area is that's all D soils, and all the borings just show there's no infiltration out there. There's little to no infiltration. So, and actually the state regulations don't even allow permeable pavement in D soils. So, and D soils, A is very, very well drained soil, and B and C and D. So the classification of the soils, A is the best for infiltration, D is the worst. And there's no infiltration up in that area.
Okay.
So we didn't think that was the best place to put, well, we're really not allowed to put permeable pavement based on the state guidelines.
Got it. And then the last question I have on the environmental issues have to do with the electrification of our fleet. And, you know, we know that's on the horizon. So is this site set up so that we can be able to plug in the future as we turn our fleet from fossil fuel to electric vehicles?
So I think I can answer that one for you, Commissioner Butler. What we've done, and we had a meeting about this earlier today, is that we're kind of trying to future-proof the project so that it's not problematic to incorporate that change when and if it comes online. And so we have the ability to charge electric vehicles in both buildings with the power supply available to us. And then we're also going to extend conduit from both buildings A and B to the parking areas, which will allow us to include charging stations in the more remote areas around the site, like the perimeter, as that fleet change occurs. So we'll put conduits from the buildings out to areas where we'll have the cars and trucks parked, so that when that happens, we'll be able to, rather than tear up the parking lot and try and retrofit those charging stations, we'll be able to do that right from the time that becomes available.
Great, thank you. And I'd also like to thank you for taking into account the comments that we made on first time around about moving the salt dome further away from the step pool conveyance system and the stream. So definitely appreciate that change.
Happy to do it. So let's see.
Could I ask a couple of questions? Could I ask a question based on Ms. Butler's? I don't know if I heard you correctly. On the 95 quote shared spaces, their employee and their fleet spaces also. Did you say that you're going to put in an infrastructure that will later allow for charging stations?
Yes.
Or did you say that the infrastructure for electrification is only inside the building?
Well, at this point, it would go to the buildings with the ability to take it to the perimeter areas when that becomes an area that we're going to put electric vehicles. So the easiest thing to do is to put the electric vehicles inside first, just because they can be charged easily overnight when those spaces aren't being used. So for instance, in the service bay, which you'll see the plans in just a moment, there's a good deal of room in there for the first round of cars that would take charging. Similarly, some of the trucks that could be charged would be located in building B. So again, it's kind of, we don't want to spend money now for things that we don't have in place, but we want to provide the ability to accommodate that need when that shows.
So
when the conduits in now around the perimeter.
Yes.
Oh, okay. So around the perimeter, you'll be able to wire that more easily in the future. Did I get that right? Am I understanding?
You are. That's correct.
Okay. And inside the building's a different matter. I mean, it's got a sufficient capacity and so forth. You can wire that later.
Yeah,
okay.
and the theory is that the demand for charging is not real high, but it's also at a time, because we'll charge them in the evenings when the buildings aren't being used. So the demand for hydraulic lifts and pneumatic tools is, not there in the evening. So the power share works pretty well.
I hate to be a bother, but did anybody ever think about putting solar panels on? Even for the daytime work, to power pumps and compressors and so forth?
We have not gone into that in great detail. Our experience has been that, it's a better plan for large facilities like this to work with a third party to lease space to them to put solar panels on and own and operate those and feed them back into the grid. You can do that, but we haven't found that to be effective on buildings of this scale yet. So that may be coming, but it's not part of the plan at this time.
You mean buildings of this scale mean that it's too small or too large?
Well, the configuration of these, they're not really big buildings. I mean, if you think about like a big box store, it would be a good deal bigger than that. And that's where you're seeing the leasing of the roof space, like a Walmart or something like that. You're seeing that in other areas, but it's all about the economics. It only happens at times when there are federal subsidies to help make that happen and the companies are doing well in that front. You're not seeing much of that at this time.
Do the buildings need to be constructed in such a way that they can later take on panels, or will these be constructed in such a way that they can take them on later?
Well, that's a great question. They're pre-engineered metal buildings, and they come with pluses and minuses. The pluses is that they are, from an economic standpoint and a durability standpoint, they work well for this use. I'm not sure that adding the additional load of the weight of the solar panels is accommodated in here. We can look into that, but also fastening through the metal roof creates problems for the user below, because a membrane roof, which you would see on a flat roof, is more repairable, let's say, when you have to penetrate it. But these sloped roofs are a little bit trickier to do that on. So I'm not so sure this is a great place to do it.
Actually, I'd like to just point out that, to follow along what Bob said, I'd like to know if it's possible to do that, and if it costs more money, how much more. People look back at the Pitt Moyer Center and say, gosh, why didn't we think about constructing that roof in a way that would have allowed solar panels? So we don't want to miss an opportunity here if we can.
Well, we'll look into that with our design team. I mean, that's a possibility. I'm not sure if it means upgrading the structure or changing the roof system there. It'll certainly move the needle from a cost standpoint, but we're happy to check into that and report back.
Thanks so much.
You'll have 2 weeks. I would really like to hear what your answers are.
Okay, well, we'll put that on the list of things to make sure we're prepared to answer at our next, when we do the hearing.
Thank you.
Sure. Any other questions related to overall site issues?
Well, can we go back to Mr.
Hold on,
Schuman?
are you the complete brief? You haven't gone into building plans yet and
No, we
whatnot.
haven't gotten to the buildings yet. I just thought if there was an open question related to the site, maybe we catch it now.
Okay, I'm fine with that, but we still don't know. We got a lot to go, but yeah, if you want to do it that way, let's go. Let's do it. Go ahead, Bob.
These are questions for Mr. Schuman. I'm not familiar with several of the things that you spoke about. The storm scepter system, does that require maintenance of any sort, removal of the sludges and so forth?
It does. I mean, there's a regular maintenance for it. They typically use vac trucks, which it'll be a perfect spot for this location. So the DPW has vac trucks, and they would be able to vacuum those out. So yeah, these devices settle out the grit, the sand, the dirt, and other things that they're washing the vehicles off with, and they can use the vac trucks to clean, to get all that material out of there.
How do you know when it needs flushing, cleaning?
There's a vault, and you can determine measurements, when the certain sediment gets to a certain level. They do have, there's maintenance requirements for those. So They got to be checked, inspected post-construction every 6 months for the first year to determine the oil and sediment accumulation rates. Different uses have different, accumulation rates. So it'll be an ongoing maintenance for the public works.
Okay.
Is there anything active that could, some sort of active monitor that can say, hey, I need to be cleaned? That kind of thing?
Not that I know of. I mean, I think your best monitor is really inspection.
Yeah, Terry, if I could just say,
Sure.
part of maintaining these sort of features that will be incorporated into the site will be tied to the standard operating procedures that the department has. I don't believe that there's a need for remote sensing because the feature is not in an inaccessible location whereby part of the general housekeeping and maintenance of the facility, couldn't be inspected. So a requirement would be that the superintendents who are present on site would be charged with being responsible for maintenance of these items. So I don't really see that as being a problem. And as Terry did point out, we do have Vector trucks that are used to clean out our wet wells. And, it's a fairly simple transition to pump these out. And once your silting would be calibrated based on actual in situ performance. It's not something that every site would silt at the same rate, right? So within a short period of time, you would know what your silting rate is and what the appropriate frequency of cleaning is. So those will be handled through our SOPs largely. We don't need to incur costs for remote sensing for this site, for those features.
Does the same thinking apply to the brine system over at the salt barns, or does that require a different sort of a maintenance?
The brine system is entirely controlled through PLC controllers. It's like a logic controller. So there are several of them manufactured by the salt manufacturers, Cargill. There are quite a few. And they are sort of like, you push a button. It's not like the old systems where you had to have a lot of human intervention to make the brine. There is a process for backwashing to clean the grit out of the filters, and that is sort of deposited into your wells and then treated accordingly. And the brine system is an automated system. Once you provide water and you provide salt, the PLC controls the correct percentages of the concentration, and it produces the brine. So that is actually very simple, kind of a factory, so to speak. Requires very little human intervention.
And what happens with this material once it's been treated? What happens to it?
I'm sorry, the brine, are you speaking? What are you referring to?
About the brine system. I have no idea what,
Oh, the brine, okay, the brine system.
I don't even know what a POC is.
I'm sorry, the programmable logic controller.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I should have spelled that. So it's really the common sort of brain that is in many of these industrial pieces of machinery. And it is programmed to, with the brine, you want to make a certain concentration of salt in the liquid for it to be effective when you spray it on the road. It's part of an anti-icing process.
Yes.
There are two ways that DPWs deal, or state highways deal with dealing with winter storms. If you're, for instance, driving, say, on any of the state highways, you'll notice in advance of a storm, you'll see symmetric lines going down the kind of white lines on the pavement. What that is resulting from is the brine that is sprayed. So they liquefy the salt and they spray it. And what it does is it prevents ice from bonding to the roadway deck. So it's an anti-icing process. The old way is to sort of like let the ice form or the snow fall, and then you go out and you spray your salt. and that is called de-icing. So it's a proactive measure that is used to use less salt. It's more environmentally friendly, and two, it produces much better results as far as pavement treatment for safety, general safety overall. Did I answer the question?
Well, I got the impression that there's a drain in front of this building and it goes into some sort of a system, and that something happens with the stuff in the system. And that's what I'm concerned about. And I guess my context is when the Department of Public Works, before your time, came to us with the general idea of putting this installation here, not this with these specifics, but that there was a lot of talking about making it really an environmental example. And I'm just trying to chase down what some of these trouble spots might be, and to understand them and to just raise to the surface what some of the long-term maintenance requirements could be. So if you understand my context, you might understand my specific question. What happens with the stuff that's on the apron in front of the salt barn?
Just may sort of set the context. Our facility is a permitted facility. It's covered under the Maryland Department of the Environment, MS4, which is the Municipal Separate Storm Sewer System, which is just really a wordy way of saying our stormwater conveyance system permit. And every municipality in the state of Maryland, the state highway, is part of the Clean Water Act that is sort of developed by the EPA, that has been sort of rendered down to non-point pollution prevention permitting for agencies and municipalities. So Public Works would be covered under the city's MS4 permit. The MS4 permit has what are called minimum control measures. There are 6 minimum control measures, which by law we must comply with to be in conformity with the permit. One of those measures is what is called good housekeeping. And the name is reflective of the action. That for our site, we have to identify potential sources of pollution, one of which is salt. We use salt, or oils, or lubes, anything that could sort of contaminate surface water bodies, because stormwater is not treated generally, and certainly not in Annapolis or in most places. And those SOPs require the DPW to develop standard operating procedures in accordance with our stormwater pollution prevention plans to comply with the permit. So what you're referring to is that if we have winter operations and we're loading salt, the building is big enough that we no longer, unlike Spa Road, if we go back to Spa Road, it's an old style dome where salt had to be placed on the ground from the trucks that deliver and pushed into the building. So there's a structural defect in that type of dome, and that contamination is sort of being built in. This dome here that we have is big enough for the trucks to enter the building and to offload. So that would be a standard operating procedure. When we take salt deliveries, we would not put it on the ground in front and push it in. The truck would go into the building and it would tip and deliver the 75 tons or whatever it is that they're delivering per load. And then we would sort of, even if there's additional salt on the pad outside, we would then sweep it. That's part of our standard operating procedures. It would be picked up by the hotspot protection constructions that are done, and that would be disposed of in accordance with the requirements of the permit. So basically, at the long and the short of it is basically that this site, through good housekeeping practices and robust standard operating procedures, would not contaminate its surroundings in any way that is sort of significant. So that is something that I think is good to make aware to the commission.
Well, it all depends on good housekeeping over the years.
No, it depends on good housekeeping that I'm responsible for this
Well-
facility. I can't speak to what Annapolis did before or at
I'm
different
saying,
facilities. But
yeah,
here,
into-
I'm responsible for this site. And I have made it clear to my superintendents and the operational staff that good housekeeping is something that we must practice and we will practice, and it's a non-negotiable for me.
And Bob, I don't know if this helps clarify it for you, but you were asking where does the waste from that brine area go? It's not like it's collected and shipped off. It's actually going through this filtration system that ends up at the step pool conveyance system and then empties out into the stream that leads to Weems Creek. So there really, Mike, maybe you can confirm this, but there will never be any waste product that's taken off-site, via, in trucks, correct?
That's correct. No waste salt. I mean, we would have
Right.
to truck off oils, waste oil and things of that
Yeah.
nature, but no, the salt would remain on site. It's captured. Many of the features that Terry went over are excellent features for an industrial site like this. And we will recapture, the salt, preventing it from leaking or polluting its surroundings or the site in general.
And Mike, just to clarify, are we using salt or brine?
We currently use salt. I mean, salt is the basis of brine. Brine is the liquefied salt. It's sort of it's mixed at a certain concentration for effectiveness against ice. So salt is the basis of everything. But when we make brine, we don't currently do that. We plan to. It actually is an environmentally positive step because it uses less tons of salt to treat per mile, if you will, once we begin to brine. And that's why many agencies use it, including the SHA and Arundel County and tons of other agencies statewide.
And that's great because that's confirmed something I heard too. People are moving away from just spreading salt.
Right.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
Well, let's hope. Good housekeeping seal of approval.
Absolutely.
All right. I mean, that's going to be the key. We could say all we want and write into conditions all we want. It all depends on what happens, 10, 15, 20 years from now. Whether things are being emptied, cleaned, swept, inspected. It all depends on that because you're right on right at the headwaters of, Weems Creek, which I don't need to remind you.
Right.
So I hope that I'm comforted, but thank you for your explanations to a non-engineer like me.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Thank you. I have a question for Deb Schwab. Deb?
Yeah.
What kind of maintenance is involved in microbial retention areas?
It's similar to regular landscape maintenance, but with the idea that you don't be adding mulch to it the way you do a normal landscape bed. They just really needed to be kept weeded, and then they have to be kept from having, say, leaves accumulate and fill up the volume that you're trying to have in there. And that's why we also don't recommend that remulching every year, because bioretention, the mulch just floats up if you put too much in.
So what
other
happens
than that,
after-
it's pretty much like regular landscape maintenance.
So what happens? You have a 5-year maintenance agreement with your landscape contractor. How do you deal with these bioretention areas?
It's part of the landscape maintenance.
That landscape, we only have a bond for 5 years.
Right. Well, it's like anything on a site. I mean, if you have storm drains, you have to clean your storm drains. I mean, everything,
Deb, if I could
everything in
jump
the
in
world
there.
needs to be maintained. And after the 5 years, it needs to be continued to be maintained by the Public Works Department. And it sounds like Mike plans on doing that.
Yes, that's exactly correct.
Is there any simple checklist of what needs to be done with Mike to maintain these bioretention areas? Any very simple, straightforward checklist that can be understood?
Well, in the planting notes under maintenance, it says to weed, to remove invasives. You know, I mean, there's actually in the planting notes, there's a little piece on maintenance. It's about 3 or 4 sentences, which pretty well covers it.
I'm sorry, Mr. Wallman, I could jump in on this. The engineered plans do have maintenance of these facilities. They have there's a list of maintenance things that are required on the plans themselves.
Okay, I mean,
And
I just
that would be
recall,
folded into, pardon me, that would be folded into our operational practices for maintenance of the bioretentions. That, you know, periodically the media has to be refreshed, and you know, we would follow the maintenance plans that keep it functional, because it really if that is not done, it's going to become less effective over time, and it really is an important component BMP on our site to help with sort of reducing the contamination leaving the site. So again, that becomes part of our operational. You know, I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with bioretentions are great, but it is an operational practice that allows them to be functional or not, or less so.
right, because in 10 years from now, they could not be functioning at all because nobody's cleaned them out.
They could if the city did not, if PW did not follow the SOPs that will be set up for this. That's correct.
All right, okay. Thank you. I have nothing. Oh, I do have one final question. It has to do with the Forest Conservation Act. What are the requirements on this? There was extensive clearing done by the prior owner. Do we inherit his obligations under I guess, the Forest Conservation Act that existed at that time? Or do we inherit it without those obligations?
He had to do the new forest conservation requirements that the previous developer fell right when it was changing over to the new regulations.
So what did he do? Do you know?
He cleared and then he preserved and placed in an easement. So with this project, we will have to revise that easement, obviously, because we're clearing another half acre and then we're establishing more easement as well. So we are obligated through the permit process to we'll have to revise that recorded easement on the forest conservation.
But he cleared the site of fairly mature trees, as I recall. Was he required to do any reforestation?
No, because he met it all on site with the
conservation easement?
Conservation, correct.
Okay. All right. Do you have any idea of? No, that's okay. I'll withdraw the question. I think you answered it about trees and where they're going and what, you know, how much you're doing.
Yeah, well, and maybe if Kevin, you're still on the phone, you could maybe, if you go back one more, Leo, maybe. Yeah.
There we go. Yeah, so I mean, the planting that we're proposing is going into the floodplain, which is a priority planting area per the city's code. It's currently not forested, and so we're proposing to plant it. That's where our reforestation is going. And there are a few street trees, which we get credit for that canopy for the code. So that's how we're planning to meet the requirements.
Okay, well, okay. Thank you. I have no, Mr. Sale, I have no further questions.
Thank you. I have a few questions that should be rather quick, and I'll make a point before the questions. It seems like the existing city pre-storm treatment or storm treatment for roads is solid rock salt versus brining. But yet I see brining being done on the county roads or state roads that lead into us. Is that correct, Mr. Johnson?
That's correct, Commissioner Sale.
Okay, and then when we move to this new facility, it's going to give us a brining facility. So should we expect to be moving from a solid rock salt treatment to then a pre-storm brining treatment, which is more environmentally friendly? Is that true?
That's our plan. It would not be a total elimination. You would never eliminate the use of solid rock salt, but it would reduce significantly the quantity required to fight a particular storm.
and I'm trying to bring this out for the public, the layman, and so to understand this. So we would be pre-storm treat, once with this facility, it would help us pre-storm treat by actually having a brining facility, and then maybe areas where we weren't able to pre-treat or we would need rock salt, that would then be spread after ice forms. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So this facility is, I like it in the fact that you have, if we could zoom in on the actual salt barn, and I'm not going to spend another minute or two on this, zoom in on the actual salt barn itself. More. Okay, drag that to the center of the screen, please, for everybody. Zoom in again. And what we have there, you have the orange building, you have a light gray concrete pad. That's a concrete pad, the light gray in the side of that, yep. And then the dark gray is gravel. All of that leading to stopping any salt from coming out of the brining barn, off the truck wheels, whatnot, as they go in and out. Now, the irony of all this is that's a fantastic design, and I like it, to control the salt from going down into the local stream. But then when a storm event's going to happen, aren't we going to take those trucks out and then brine our entire parking lots in the light gray, and also then go out on the streets, obviously because we need to do it, and we're going to just start spreading brine and rock salt over the entire city, and then when it goes and dissolves, it dissolves into French drains right in to the bay and everywhere else. Now, that may sound really bad to some people, but it's sodium chloride, also known as NaCl, which is salt, which is already in the bay's lower level. And it's arguable how much of that, the salt salinity of the bay and the surrounding rivers increases due to that salt. It would be great if we didn't do any salt at all, but we need salts to maintain society flowing. And we're doing a fantastic job of that in this design of maintaining that salt inside the barn and stopping its spread. And also in your parking lots where you're going to have to pre-storm treat so you can stay functional. It's then going to, any salt that comes off of our own parking lots is going to be treated and captured. I think that's fantastic. But the irony is then those trucks are going to go out and spread it all around town, because that's what we're going to do for society. So we're fighting over really small potatoes here, when if we really want to protect the bay and everywhere else, we would, cease work during those frozen days. And that just isn't going to happen. That's my point of interest there. My other point while you're zoomed in there is, could we get a quick overview of what the pavement source, pavement type is actually going to be for those parking lots, and also the entrance ramp, entrance apron off of the main street? Is it all going to be concrete, asphalt, or a mix of both?
It's all proposed to be asphalt.
Proposed to be asphalt. Now, my limited civil engineering background of a degree in light experience after college, which is nothing compared to Mr. Johnson, our new Department of Public Works Director with a master's from Columbia, and he's got a PE license. And I'm going to ask you, Mr. Johnson, since we have a parking lot that's going to see a lot of slow turning, very heavy vehicles, heavily laden with salt, do we think, and also we are the city, we could be the premier icon, the representative of environmentally friendly. It seems to me that a concrete parking lot may cost more, but it's going to last twice as long. Trucks that are turning on it, you'd rather have them turn on concrete rather than on a flexible asphalt pavement. You'd rather park trucks on top of concrete than a flexible asphalt pavement. And you would also rather have an asphalt, concrete versus asphalt pavement, because you won't have to recoat it and then have that asphalt slowly leach off into the surrounding environment over time. So, Mr. Johnson, what if money is no option here? Why wouldn't we choose concrete versus asphalt in this scenario?
Well, I think there are a couple of things that you looked at. With that type of construction, it is quite expensive. And, if we lived in the world where money was no object, I guess maybe we could just say, carte blanche, that we could do it. But the reality is that we do have to look at the benefit cost ratio for different alternatives. And having, the jointed slab, it has to be constructed to a high tolerance because of the loads between the transfer between the respective slabs of the wheel loads. It would most likely lose in the economic competition as we looked over the reasonable economic life of the choice. That'd be what I would say, without us having run the numbers, but just based on my experience. That is probably suited better for the interstate system. than for a small facility like this, where the scale doesn't really allow that alternative to win the competition economically. I suspect that it would lose if we looked at it for a benefit cost ratio.
So if economics were not a factor and you were looking more environmentally, wouldn't you say that concrete would be the better option?
You know, I'm not sure that it would, because you can prevent the leaching from the site of asphalt. Asphalt isn't leaching at that rate in terms, it's not really a highly soluble type of a material. It's an emulsion. It's based on an emulsion type of a material. And, you know, maybe from a heat island perspective, you might make an argument that it's superior. But if an asphalt parking lot is constructed properly, it functions quite well. Some airports which land very, very heavy vehicles are asphalt. And, you know, it has to do with the base and the design section that is used. So I'm not really convinced that is a clear winner environmentally. From a heat island perspective, clearly it's you know, it's going to win, but that's just one factor in the economic pie, so to speak, that has to be looked at. And we always have to look benefit cost. We always have to do that, unfortunately.
And to be clear for the public, the heat island perspective being that you have a lot of black asphalt there, creating a very hot area versus white concrete, which would be, or a lighter gray concrete, which would be a lot more reflective and not soaking up energy in the local environment. So in your professional opinion, you feel that the asphalt pavement there can easily be handled. So over time, slowly you get asphalt leaching off of the top of the pavement. Your asphalt has to be repaved, recoated. You think our local management facilities could actually handle that before it enters the bay, and those will be cleaned out routinely over the years, as Mr. Waldman impressed upon you. Is that correct?
That's correct. That's correct. That'd be part of our SOP, standard operating procedures for this site, and that is how you achieve the quality on the site, if you will. It's done through SOPs.
And if money was no option, would you put concrete there versus asphalt?
I'm not sure. Again, I'm not really I mean, I always tend to want to look at it from a benefit cost. I mean, there are many materials that can work. I don't really see that concrete there's a compelling case for concrete. You know, when you look at the variables involved in it, it's not really a compelling case is not made for concrete, because it wins in some areas and it loses in others. So you have to it's a little more nuanced than just saying that concrete is the better choice. Actually, if you actually look at it, the cost of making concrete is quite high, you know, thermodynamically. And, you know, it depends on at which point you begin to do your math. And oftentimes those arguments are pick points that allow concrete to sort of win, but you're not looking at it from the beginning, from the mining of the aggregate all the way through. Is that the correct point at which you look at it? So thermodynamically, the cost of making a pound of concrete versus an equivalent amount of asphalt may not be as clear a winner as one might think, right?
You know, that's something I'd never really considered, is the actual manufacture of the concrete, the energy involved. So you go that far back and do the comparison, yeah. But looking on it from specifically a selfish local perspective, I just hate to see all of these asphalt parking lots constantly getting recoated, and then 5-6 years later they're recoating them again. It's like, well, where did all that asphalt go that was nice black and out there? Where is it? And you look over and it is not the greatest lively trees or grass looking around that parking lot. Okay, your professional opinion wins over mine, and I yield. So that's my last comment on pavement. The only other future questions I'll have, hopefully you guys can address, are backup systems during emergencies to keep facilities running when loss of power in the local grid may happen, and also roof slope for snow loading. That's it. So I'm free to go on. No questions further from me.
Okay. So I'm going to run through architectural elements of the project and just describe you what we're up to here. And I'm going to do this very quickly. You've seen most of this before. We've got a program here which includes building 1, which we've described already, with administrative function, and a maintenance shop, which allows the city to bring all of the fleets in at different times to do the necessary maintenance to keep us up and going. So all that occurs in building 1. In building 2 is vehicle storage, and there's really 2 components to the vehicle storage. There's areas that are heated, where there are trucks that need to be kept warm at all times so that they function properly. And then there's unheated storage. Then there's the salt barn. We talked a little bit about that so far. And then the storage bins for bulk materials the city uses on a regular basis, like gravel and other materials for road repair. And then the site included issues related to parking and environmental stormwater management issues, which we've covered pretty heavily already. So in building 1, this is a blow up of the plan for building 1. You've got your entry parking lot over here we talked about with your ADA access is all incorporated into the design and has been reviewed by the city already. We've got an entry point and meeting rooms and offices on the first floor. We've got restrooms and locker room space. And then there's a second floor we'll get into in just a moment. And then to the back of the building is the pre-engineered metal building structure we've been talking about. And so we've got bays for the smaller trucks and cars the city services in these areas. And we've got larger bays that will take a number of different vehicles, including the largest of our ladder trucks and some of the bigger equipment the city uses for the big dump trucks and such. So all of these service elements are incorporated into building 1. On the second floor of building 1, it's double volume here to accommodate the height requirements for the lifts for the service bay area. And the second floor of the administrative building includes offices for the public works staff, a meeting room, and also additional locker room space, IT, other technical components in the building, all housed inside. And then, as was mentioned earlier, the flat roof portion of the building is set to accommodate a green roof program to help us with our environmental requirements on the site. Elevations of the building. At the top, you can see the front of the administrative building. Again, the materials are selected in an effort to provide longevity for the facility. So there's a good deal of masonry and there's a good deal of metal panel assemblies. All of the windows are aluminum. And everything here is designed to be highly efficient in terms of productivity or production of the materials that are used to make up the building. And then our back portion is the pre-engineered metal piece. So here you see the sloped roof here, and then you see the large doors along the back to accommodate the large vehicles that come in and out. Side elevations show how the two blend together. There are a lot of penetrations in the building. You can see those by the marks over here. And then again, you can see the scale of the front versus the scale of the back. So I think it organizes well and should function efficiently for the city. There's windows in the service bays to provide natural lighting, so we don't have to have as much illumination from an electric source. Building 2, as I described earlier, really breaks down into 2 parts. There's a part that's heated for trucks that need to be kept warm and a part that's not heated. Access is on the left and right side, or top and bottom, if you will. And also at the ends, there's space for bays over here. So again, the idea was to put as much in the smallest volume we could, so it's as efficient as it can be. And you can see how many vehicles are accommodated here. It's quite a few. Elevations of that second building. This building in its entirety is a pre-engineered metal building structure. Again, highly efficient and cost effective. The last area is the salt barn area, and here's the salt barn. I'll show you images of that in just a moment, with our bays, our storage bulk areas around the perimeter, and again, the drive areas we've talked about already. Here's some imagery for the salt barn. These are quite a bit different from the old ones we've seen. There are high bin assemblies here that allow us to get the trucks in and out of the facility very easily. Again, this is a good deal bigger than the one we have now, but the ability to bring the trucks inside and not have the loading and unloading happening directly in front of it at all times is helpful. So this is a 3-dimensional image from Google Maps that shows the precinct where the building sits. And we've modeled this building and the entire site so you could get a better sense of how it will really look in the context of the other buildings in the street in the area. A close-up of the front. A couple other images that show you how the buildings are arranged. How the assemblies in the back will work with the wash area shown here. This is building 2. Again, you can see where the driveway goes around the entire perimeter of the building for efficiency. Another view where you can see building 1 in the distance. It's the back of building 1. This is an overview of the entire thing, and here you can see the salt barn in the back, and you can see the scale of that dump truck that goes up against it. So it's really quite large, and I think it's going to do just what it needs to do. So the last piece I wanted to talk about was the lead requirement for the project, leadership in energy and environmental design. And so one of the city requirements is that all of their buildings achieve a silver certification. It's not the lowest, it's not the highest, it's a mid-level. It is one step up from the minimum standards to achieve LEED certification. The process includes evaluating things that are handled on site, like stormwater and lighting, and goes all the way down into the mechanical systems in the building. So in order to achieve this certification, you need to meet certain checkpoints along the way in the design. And in the end, you have to be able to demonstrate that the systems are above average to a certain measure beyond what the code requires. So the systems for mechanical are more sophisticated than you would have in an entry-level design. And also even the envelope, so the insulation of these buildings and even where the materials are sourced, they have a certain percentage of that material has to be recycled or have high recycled content. So one of the things most people don't know is that steel in the United States is very high in terms of its recycled content. So using that material is a good way to kind of jumpstart that. So the steel buildings help a bit. And also, you know, the masonry is another thing that can be recycled or is from recycled products along the way. So everything here is evaluated, and we work through this and monitor this scorecard with our consultant to make sure that we're achieving the point levels that we need to. Right now, you'll see we're hitting about 51, and our window for silver is 50 to 59. So, you know, we have to keep an eye on it and make sure as we develop the rest of the design that we maintain those standards and land where we need to. And then just lastly, I was going to ask Jackie Guild, who's the Deputy City Manager for Resilience and Sustainability, to talk a little bit about her involvement in the project since she's come on board. Jackie, can we have you talk a little bit?
Yes. I'm just trying to get my camera. There we go. Camera should be turning on here in a second. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Well, my camera's not turning on for some reason. So I did review all the proposal, and I had questions for Mike that I raised, and they were along the lines of forest cover and stormwater retention on site, native planting, solar, green roof, LEED, permeable pavers, asphalt versus concrete, and all of those questions were answered to my satisfaction. Some of those were based on a cost-benefit analysis, and others were just, they were meeting everything that I thought was important at this site, especially we're exceeding the Forest Conservation Act requirements to some extent, as Mike mentioned, and this helps us get towards the city's goal of achieving a 50% forest cover, canopy cover by 2036, and we're meeting our new 125% new development standards for stormwater retention. I asked questions about the stormwater conveyance system, if the salt and the brine would be treated before it hit that system. Those questions were answered to my satisfaction, so that we don't have excessive salt going into Weems Creek and impairing Weems Creek any further than it's already done there. We had hoped that there would be a restoration project going in the near future for Weems Creek by the Severn River Keeper. They put in for grant funding for a feasibility study of the Moreland branch of Weems Creek, but that was not funded. But
the city has not given up on that. We're going to partner with the county and the Severn River Keeper on that project. So we were just talking today about getting back into contact with the county and seeing if we can do some studies there and figure out some further restoration of Williams Creek that will be the receiving waters of that step pool conveyance system, the RSC. We also talked today about future proofing for electric vehicles, which is a initiative that I'm in charge of for the city, electrifying the fleet and providing charging stations and making sure that all new buildings in the city are future proof for electric vehicles, because that's where we're going. Initially, we're starting with passenger vehicles in the fleet, but eventually we will be moving to light duty trucks, and eventually we'll get to heavy duty trucks as the technology improves. So that is, and it's excellent that these buildings are being built to be able to handle those electric loads in the future and in the parking areas. I understand the questions about permeable pavers were answered to my satisfaction. You know, the soils there just are not conducive. And in fact, the state does not allow permeable pavers in certain areas of the site. And overall, I think this facility is leaps and bounds ahead of our existing facilities as far as being environmentally friendly. And so I'm very pleased with the result.
So Jackie, thank you. So,
You're welcome.
So with that, I think that concludes our presentation, and we're happy to answer questions that have yet to be answered.
Okay, thank you very much, Leo. Any commissioners have any questions of the presenters?
No, I would just like to thank everyone again for making some really major modifications that improve this plan. Also, I'm very much looking forward to hearing about your analysis on making the roofs ready for solar panels in the future.
And on that note, the roof that's green for the administrative building, what is that surface again?
Well, that's it. There is a special process for selecting the plant materials that can be put on these roofs. And the goal is to come up with products or materials that require very little maintenance and care. So it's usually a 2-time-a-year event where someone has to go up there and make sure that things are growing as they should. Again, it's part of the LEED requirement that the landscape materials require little to no irrigation, and the roof materials require none. So there'll be a little bit of care in the first year or two to make sure that they're thriving as they should. But once we get past that, these systems essentially just need to be cleaned, and you know, there's you know, some materials might show up through bird droppings that aren't supposed to be there that need to be removed. But beyond that, I think that green roof is really something that sustains itself over time. So we've had some experience with this, and there are companies that specialize in this. They actually do them as trays that come in rather than trying to plant a new roof from scratch. And so we're looking at that as the best possible system to get us up and running quickly.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions from commissioners?
I would like to thank this team for answering the questions that I and the others have posed. It's been quite informative. Thank you.
Okay, hearing nothing from the rest of the commissioners, we will move on to opening the public hearing for this item, which will remain open through to our next meeting. And I have to ask city staff if any new comments regarding the Department of Public Works presentation from the public.
There were 2 public comments that were sent to the commission from some business owners on in the Hudson Street area that had concerns with traffic on Hudson Street and parking. But as in the presentation, you see all the parking is handled on site. I also forwarded you a comment letter from the Annapolis Environmental Commission, which I think Ms. Guild answered the environmental concerns. So there was no other public comments.
Kevin, I had one from Ann Stevenson too.
Yeah,
Was
Ann
that second?
Stevenson is on the Environmental Commission, so she forwarded the AEC comments.
Okay. I had an email from her as well.
Well, she had sent them through the Form Center to both the Board of Appeals and the Planning Commission, and then also sent an email attachment. So we got them all, and I sent them all to you.
So they should be combined as one?
Yeah, it was one submittal on behalf of the Environmental Commission.
Thanks, Kevin. And so we have the exhibits to put in the record.
Yes, let's please enter those exhibits in the record, the comments from the public, and also reading aloud these comments from the public and displaying them on the screen. I'd like to, in lieu of time, since we have another presentation we'd like to get to tonight, I'd like to wait till we get all of them together at our next meeting and then present them all in the meeting at the same time, if that's okay. Any commissioners have any issues with that? And Jackie's already responded to some of the questions that we've had for that. So thank you for the members of the public actually giving us some good comment and feedback, and we will bring those even more to light when we continue our public hearing at the next meeting for this item. Any other comments from the commissioners during the public hearing in a moment right now? Okay, well, as I said, we're going to keep the public comment session open. So any members of the public, feel free to log in online and submit your comments through the portal. And we'll bring those to light in the next meeting for this. And that's all I have for this applications presentation at the moment. And we'll move on. Go ahead.
Thursday, March 18th is the next meeting.
Thank you for making that public. Thursday, March 18th. So we will now move on to the next item on the agenda, which will be major site design plan review application by 100 Ridgely Avenue, SDP 2020-002, for the proposed redevelopment of subject property with a new 6,200 gross square foot, 2-story, single-family attached residential building containing 4 dwelling units, approximately 1,550 square feet each, as well as required off-street parking with vehicular access from Giddings Avenue on property located at 100 Ridgely Avenue. And this public hearing will also be opened until March 18th. But first, we need to start with staff presentation. And being the fact that we have about 35 minutes to go, we'll see how far we get. And sometime around 10 o'clock or shortly thereafter, we might have to cut it. So let's go ahead and get the staff presentation out of the way.
Okay, well, in the interest of time, I won't repeat the description that you just read. It's on the corner of 100 Ridgely Avenue and Giddings Avenue. And it's 4 dwelling units that are single family attached. It's permitted use in the PM zone, and it's a major site design. We reviewed it for chapter 2122 and 2162, and the applicant's prepared to give a presentation.
Okay, and that concludes everything from the staff.
Well, we're recommending approval of the application.
Okay, thank you. Any questions from the commissioners to the staff before we move into the developer or applicant's presentation? Okay, let's move right into the applicant's presentation.
Great, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Stephen Hyatt, attorney Hyatt Weber, 200 Westgate Circle, Suite 500, Annapolis, Maryland, on behalf of 100 Ridgely Avenue LLC, the applicant for the SDP before you tonight. For the record, we have submitted an exhibit package, which you've probably seen. We also have the affidavit of posting and the affidavit of mailing notice. So there's no question as to who got notice. This was properly advertised and posted. I'll be very brief. This is a by right, permitted use. These single family attached dwellings. This is as straightforward as it gets. We don't need any variances. We don't need any waivers. We don't need any adjustments or relief. We can comply with the bulk regulations of the code. We provide parking as required by the code. And we meet all the environmental site design standards. There's microbial retentions and permeable pavement. We treat 125% of the volume at the site. There's 24 new trees being planted when there's only 14 required based on what's being removed. And otherwise, this is, again, pretty straightforward and in compliance. And again, in the spirit of saving time here, I'm going to let our team, the typical team that you've seen before on our past projects, do their thing. And I'm going to fill in some gaps, but we're just going to let them run through. We've got Terry Schumann, Bay Engineering. We have Kevin Campion with Campion Ruby, landscape architect. And then we have Leo Wilson, who you're probably tired of hearing from, but he's still hanging around. So with that, I'm going to just jump in and let us get started. I think Terry's going to start us off, and Andrew, I believe, is going to run a little presentation for us. Great, thank you, Andrew. All right, so Mr. Schumann, go ahead, state your name and occupation and everything for the record, and give us a little background, if you will.
Terry Schumann, Bay Engineering, principal with Bay Engineering, Inc., 2661 River Road, Building 800, Annapolis, Maryland, 21401. Civil engineer on this project. This represents the project site. You're familiar with it from probably our last presentation with Annapolis Street. Our project is located right at the intersection of Ridgely and Giddings. Right, and currently, right now, it's got a single-family house on it, and it grass area in the back, and it has access directly off of Ridgely Avenue. Ridgely Avenue is a state road. Giddings Avenue is a county road. So I think we're all familiar with and you can just see the general nature of the properties there: commercial along Annapolis Street, and commercial and office buildings to the south. Let's go to the next slide. This is just a blow up. You can again see the house, and you can see the direct access off of Ridgely Avenue, and adjacent to it is a medical office building and Giddings Avenue. So that's just a blow up of the site. Give you a little context with the surrounding areas. Let's go to the next slide, please. That's looking from the other side. That's Ridgely Avenue right in front of you, and then we're on the other side of Ridgely Avenue looking at the site. So you can see the house and the and Giddings Avenue in the left side. Let's go to the next site. These are just more pictures of the house. The top one's looking up at Ridgely, or at Giddings, looking up toward Ridgely. The second to the right is just directly from the 20 Ridgely site, looking directly at the house, and then another picture looking back toward Annapolis Street. Next site. So this on the left side is just an existing aerial, and on the right side you can see the overlay of our proposed development on top of the existing. I think we'll get into the proposed site plan a little better on the next plan. So this is the proposed site. You can see that the site is in the buildings centrally located, facing facing Giddings Avenue. The parking area is just to the north, and just to the north of that is the toward Annapolis Street. So we do have a parking lot, we have a building, and then in the front is there will be some widening along Ridgely Avenue. Pedestrian access, there's no sidewalk today, so there'll be a sidewalk that will be placed along the frontages. And like I said before, it's four units with the front facing Giddings Avenue. I guess I can talk stormwater. Let's just
can I ask you just a quick question about where the private and public rights of way are in this diagram?
Sure.
So the setbacks show 10 feet on the Giddings side. And so 10 feet from the building is about half the distance to the proposed sidewalk. So basically, is the public the public right of way goes in from the curb of 10, 12 feet or something like that?
It does. So you up along Ridgely, I don't know if you can do your cursor, move your cursor along Ridgely, and you can go along that, well, that's the edge of pave, but go in that darker line right there, that's the right of way.
Yeah.
So that's the property line, and then take it back up Giddings right there. Basically, that's the property line. So yes, there's a.
Okay. I'll just put a pin in that because I have some questions about how things are laid out, but I just wanted to clarify that for myself before we get there. So.
Right. So parking, these units will require 2 parking spaces per unit, so a total of 8 spaces, and that's what we're providing there. From a stormwater management standpoint, we are new development, and with new development, we have a requirement for 125% of the city and state, or the state requirements. We are providing 125%, and we are providing that in the form of, you can see up where the hand is right now, we have permeable pavement up in the parking area. And then we have 2 bioretentions. One's a raised bioretention right next to the parking area, right at the corner. That's a raised bioretention. And that'll treat some of the paved some of the patio areas in front of the units. And then we have another larger microbio area along Ridgely Avenue. And you indicated before, I mean, when you go down that road, you can see it dips toward the north and toward Annapolis Street. So all these units are going to be elevated, at least in the front, from Giddings Avenue. So there's a series of patios, raised steps up to the first floor of these units. And then further next door is, you can see the sites even higher up. So it just kind of elevates back down to Giddings Avenue. And the grade is made up with a wall in the front and steps up to the first floor. All public water sewer, all the water and sewers off of Giddings Avenue. And I think, Stephen, unless you have any questions, I think that pretty much briefly just goes through the site plan and the stormwater management.
Yeah, I think that you've covered it. I mean, was there anything, Commissioner Pline, you wanted to discuss about the public right of way before we got into the other elements here?
Well, it may open up a can of worms. I don't know if this is the right time, but it just seemed to me, I guess maybe this is a question for staff on that. In that right of way, is there something specific in the public right of way? Is there something specific underneath there, like a water main or something that needs access? I mean, that's Giddings Avenue is a very, very wide street for a very low speed city street. It's so it's not like you're ever going to need to widen the street. So that extra right of way, I mean, what I'm going to get to eventually is the layout of the building seems to be sort of crammed up against the property line to the northwest. And so what we'll get to it probably later, it seems like the backside where those decks are and the walkway to get to the deck from the parking lot is all kind of crammed in there, and the space that's on the other side of the building that's public right away is just going to be grass, which to me is kind of wasted space. I mean, it's grass. Maybe you take your dog out there to poop on it or something, but I don't think it's not really usable space other than just to provide some separation from the front patios. So it seems to me like it might be a nicer balance if you could shift the whole thing towards Giddings, 5-8 feet or something like that, to give the decks a little bit more room, so it's not sort of crammed up against that slight retaining wall, and maybe give a little bit nicer experience back there. But that would require, no doubt, some horse trading with the city to give up that public right of way, or so that's one option. Or the other thing is to move the sidewalk off the curb and put a tree lawn in. Because that makes a nicer pedestrian experience if you're not walking right up against the street. In any context, that's nicer. So anyway, that's kind of where I was going, but mostly it just seemed a little crowded in the back. I'm sort of thinking it from the standpoint, if I were going to rent one of these, you'd probably want a little bit more space back there to, put a chair or walk back. So if you're walking back and walking by your neighbor's deck, you're not like halfway stepping on their deck as you walk by. It just provides a little bit more elbow room. So I don't know if this is the right time to talk more about that, or if you just want to put a pin on it, come back to it.
I mean, since I was speaking first, I think we should go through the presentation maybe and see the whole thing before maybe we can respond to that at the end.
Okay, that's fine with me.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner Klein. We'll come back to that. Thank you, Terry. I'm going to ask Kevin Campion with Campion Ruby, our landscape architect, to introduce himself and go through his speaking points, please.
My name is Kevin Campion. I'm a partner at Campion Ruby Landscape Architects in Annapolis, 111 Cathedral, Annapolis, Maryland. Happy to be the project landscape architect for this project. It's a pretty straightforward landscape, and I'll try to be pretty brief. We really just tried to establish 3 objectives. Can we go to the next slide? The first objective was to reestablish a street tree cadence on Giddings. So as anyone that's been there recently, we know that on the south side of Giddings, there's a line of really beautiful stately willow oaks. And so we are continuing that cadence of willow oaks across the north side with 4 4-inch caliper trees. On Ridgely, we're also including 2 more willow oaks to create that urban street tree composition. The second objective was just to create nice urban terraces and gardens for the 4 units, and those gardens are in front of the units, and they're almost entirely native plants: Abelia, inkberry, clethra, Rus aromatica. So a lot of native plants that will do really well here. The third objective was to create to plant the stormwater management area on along Ridgely with native plants that make it look like it's not a stormwater management area, and it's a nice natural planting full of natives. In terms of our mitigation, like we had talked about, I think Stephen talked about it earlier. We were removing 9 trees. We're mitigated. 7 of them are Leland cypress. We're required by the code to plant 14 trees. This plan is planting 24 trees, including, like we had mentioned, 6 large street trees. That's pretty much the landscape, Stephen.
We're going to talk about the site visit you had with Brian Adams.
Brian Adams and I visited the site just to look at the trees. I'm not sure if he's on this call still. The Lelands were Lelands. There's a walnut on site that is allelopathic. It wasn't a good. He had meant it's not a good candidate for tree preservation. That's on the kind of the top left of the project, the site plan here. And then there was a holly in the back that has. I don't know if we have pictures of this holly, but we could show you if you need it. But it has a really unbalanced crown, and it's a co-dominant leader. It's 2 stems that are coming up, and it's cracking in the middle. So Brian had thought that it's a pretty, it's an aging tree. It also sits really high on the land, so any disturbance around it would be really detrimental to it. But essentially, it is a bifurcated tree that has a crack right down the center of the trunk. So we didn't think it was a candidate for preservation, and therefore trying to reestablish the future canopy with these large willow oaks.
And we have a letter that Mr. Adams submitted, I believe, that is in eTracket recommending the removal of the American holly.
Could I break in? Are you done with Mr. Campion, Mr. Hyatt?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Mr. Campion?
Yes, hi.
Hi. This is Bob Waldman. I mean, at the risk of sounding like a repetitious nag, I do want to ask, what are your plans for the rooting of these willow oaks? What
right.
Your underground, is this, what can you tell me about that? Are these going to be, what are you thinking?
They have, so this area has because we've spaced them out, they have a significant soil volume that's more than needed. This is not a situation where we need to bridge over walkways with silvacells. Each of these trees has a really ample soil volume underneath it. We're not planting them close to each other. I think they have ample space.
Do you intend on removing the soil and replacing it with more fertile soils, or what are your plans on that score?
So we will work through construction, and assuming these soils are going to be really contaminated by construction, yes, we're probably going to remove to a certain depth of soil and integrate new soil with what's there, and also test the existing soil to make sure that that it's in good health.
Yes, I would think that that's really important because being the proud possessor of 3 giant willow oaks on my property, they get to be very large if they're in a good place, and they could be quite an addition to Giddings Avenue. I mean, this really could be quite nice if it's done right. How would we best ensure that they have not only soil volume but good soil?
Yeah, we have a process that we go through. We test the existing soil. We look at what it's deficient in. Then we then prescribe a soil mix that includes a lot of organic material and all of the elements that the existing soil is deficient in. We mix it all together. We uncompact the soil, at the end of the project through different methods, and if needed, we remove soil and replace.
Who reviews that? Does Mr. Kevin Scott review that? How is that reviewed, and how do we come to those conclusions?
Well, we use our expertise over dozens of years to ensure that these trees are planted well. We will submit plans, but we as experienced landscape architects will ensure that these trees are planted well.
Okay, what I'm thinking of is that this is a very high class property and in very prominent location, and as we heard the last time, how important these vistas and so forth, streets are, as to how we might write into conditions just to ensure that more than one eye looks at this. And
yeah, we will coordinate this with Tom and Kevin, and we can submit our specifications for approval. That I can assure you we will do this properly.
All right.
We can write.
Yeah, this might come up next week, but good. I'm just, I'm pointing out my concern. Thanks.
Should we finish the presentation?
Go ahead, sir.
I wondered if Leo should finish the presentation, then we can answer questions.
Yeah, sure. I was going to ask, just as a point of interest, Kevin Scott, I'm not sure if Brian Adams' letter was admitted as an exhibit, a city exhibit.
I didn't send it to the planning commission, but as far as our agency review on it, it is attached in Track It. to Mr. Waldman's comment about the condition number 4 in our recommendation is the standard condition about a soils improvement plan. So that point is always addressed.
Okay. Can we have the letter submitted to be part of the exhibit, to be in its
Yes,
own exhibit?
I would appreciate that. I think easily done. Thank you.
Yeah, the letter from Brian Adams, I will
Yes,
send
please.
to the commission.
Thank you. Okay. With that, thank you, Kevin. With that, I'd like to have our good pal, you know him from his way too much time in front of the Planning Commission, Leo Wilson.
Thanks, Stephen. So as the project's been described, it's 4 single-family residents attached. And the first floor plan illustrates the location of the buildings relative to the site improvements. So we've got our sidewalk out front, we've got planting areas, and then we've got raised terraces that are at different levels to accommodate the slope across the site. The entrances are on Giddings Avenue, so that's going to be essentially the front of the units. Our parking is down at the end. We've got our traditional living spaces on the first floor, and then small decks out back, and then a small walkway that leads to the parking area as well. Off to the side, we have our fire retention area, and it's a pretty straightforward structure. The second floor, we've accommodated a 2-bedroom arrangement with a bath. And then in the basement, we've also decided to provide some living space, mechanical space, and a laundry for each of the residents in a second bathroom. There's also window wells in these rear yards that are arranged so that they won't conflict with the outdoor areas for each unit, to provide some light down to those lower levels, so they'll be a pleasant place to spend some time. The section illustrates how the building works relative to both the street and the adjacent property. So starting out here on Giddings, you can see that it slopes up a bit. At different places along the section, that changes a bit. Here we see our street trees that we are putting in place. And then our walkways step up to the terraces on each unit. And then in the back, you can see the walkway, some covered entry components on both sides. And then the second floors. And for this building, we've decided to go with a flat roof. We think it works pretty well, and we think it blends into the aesthetic of the area nicely. So the
Can I
rendering.
ask you a quick question, Leo, in the back there?
Yes.
The metal awnings that go, I guess, are those just over the doors, or they cover the full deck, or?
Just over the doors.
Okay.
Just over the doors.
Do they ever think about covering the whole deck to provide some, a little bit of coverage to keep rain off the deck if you keep things from getting really wet? If you wanted to store a bike back there or something like that?
Yeah, we looked at that. We felt that, it was better because the units are, adjacent to each other and window opportunities exist only on the front and back for some of the units. We felt that anything that made it harder for light to penetrate into the depth of the structure was more problematic than helpful. The patios are large enough for umbrellas, and if an awning was a consideration, that's something that we could consider. But we really felt that getting the light into the unit was kind of the driver for it.
Okay.
So there's a series of renderings here, but this just gives you a general sense of how the building's set up. We went with change in materials from the first to the second floor for masonry and a more contemporary look for the window treatments. Here you can see the canopy components. And then on the second floor, we pushed it back a little bit and changed the rhythm of the windows, and then went to a flat roof piece with a small parapet to help hide some of the mechanical equipment that may be on the roof. And we put the other buildings in the area into the renderings to scale so that you get a sense of how it works. We think that this front area, while it is awful wide, to Commissioner Klein's point, there's a lot of grade that happens here. And so you can see that entrances change just a little bit. But that wide area gives us a nice opportunity for plantings, both along the sidewalk and as slight privacy barriers to the terraces, which I think people will be more likely to use these front ones than the back. And I think they'll be really pretty places, and it feels nice and open in that area of the city.
So interestingly, in this rendering, you've actually shown a tree lawn.
Yes,
as I mentioned,
yeah.
but it's not, it's only in your rendering. Uh, I mean,
Well-
I would add, if there's room for it, I would advocate for it, or even a wider sidewalk. I mean, 5 feet is, I would consider kind of a minimum sidewalk. 6 is better.
Well, we can certainly consider that. Let's look at the rest of them, then we can
Okay.
talk about all of those things. So just moving around the building, you start to get a sense of how this thing sits into the context here. We think it works pretty well. There's really kind of, it's a crossroads, if you will, between the architectural styles. It's not the same as Annapolis Street, but it's kind of a different place. It's more of an office building type street. So we think this is going to fit in a little bit better. Another view from slightly down the road, so you can see how the terraced areas that separate the private sector from the public sector here, I think works pretty well. It's a comfortable way to separate the uses a little bit and provide a nice outdoor precinct for each one of the owners. This is how it will look from the end here. And so this is where our buyer retention areas happen here. This end unit's quite nice. It gets a nice bay window and windows up on the sides at the top. And then we start to use some different materials like wood walls and maybe a stained wood element here. And then the masonry components will be brick. That's a little bit more, like a hand tumbled brick. And then these more contemporary window components bridge the gap between the two different vocabularies. An aerial view of it as it sits on the corner. Again, you can see, just kind of how the building arranges, and of course the parking area that comes off of Giddings here provides the parking spaces required, and there's landscape around the entire perimeter of the building. So we did these, and then Camping Ruby went back in and tried to illustrate their landscape plan that we have for the property. And so, mine just show grass because that's what I draw. But Kevin's actually shown what we're intending to plant there. So you can see there's a good deal of ground cover. There's very little lawn here, actually. There's bike racks down at the end. These are Core-10 steel planters that this is our raised bioretention area that takes the runoff from the roof of the building and some of these patio areas. These things tend to do real well with that type of runoff going into them. They're kind of naturally irrigated, if you will. And then these ground covers are pretty easy to care for. This looks like a RIP to me, but anything along those lines would work well. And then again, here we see, again, this more clearly illustrates how the slope on the corners work, taking the driveways off of Ridgely here, which I think is a real nice thing to do. The slower traffic is certainly off of Giddings. What we're able to do with this is provide a really big landscape area for this bioretention. And then we've shown these trees, and we had other renderings that showed the trees at 100% opacity. So, what we do is we drop these down a little because I didn't want you to not be able to see the building or think that we're hiding it. This is a blend that shows how these trees would be located along the site. And I think it'd be really quite nice the way this thing is all arranged. So here are the trees along the edge here. As you can see, well spaced. I think they blend with the building well. I think it gives it a nice sense of, sense of place over here along the street. And I think it'd be a dramatic improvement from kind of it feels almost vacant along here now. So we're hopeful that the entire, project gives us a nice outcome and another great addition in West Annapolis. So, again, in interest of moving through this quickly so that we don't have to stop our presentation, I'm going to pause here and answer any questions that people have.
I'll jump in. I have a couple of quick ones, 3 quick questions. The flat roof that you mentioned,
Yeah.
will that have the capacity, Leo, for solar in the future?
This one would. This one's more easily accommodated. Again, it's a flat roof with a EPDM membrane. It'll be light in color to reduce our, kind of, it'll be highly reflective. So the effect will be minimized. And yeah, certainly this would. We do have a few skylights up there to get light into the center of the bedroom areas, but certainly this could accommodate skylight or solar.
Perfect. And then, thanks. And then the second question I have is, are there going to be any charging stations for electric vehicles on site?
Well, that's a good question. I know we have to meet a LEED certification requirement for this building. This is only LEED certified level. So we have to go through the scorecard and see if that's something that's going to be accommodated, but it's highly likely that we'd be able to provide one.
That would be great. Thanks. And then my third question is, are there any moderately priced dwelling units here?
There are not. This project is not subject to that requirement because of the size. The
Well, I
housing-
understand what's required, but I'm just saying, I know that you guys are very focused on the fact that Annapolis is trying to work to increase its affordable housing. So I know that you wouldn't just jump to the lowest common denominator and obviously look for only what's required. So I was just wondering if you were thinking that this could be a moderately priced dwelling unit or any of the units in this.
So let's talk.
And that wouldn't be, Commissioner Butler, it just wouldn't be economically viable for a project like this. It would
Right. Well,
require a
Stephen,
certain scale.
thanks, Stephen. I was actually just talking to Leo on that one. Just.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Yep.
So let's talk about that a little bit, because I think it's an interesting question, and I don't want to take up too much time, but the ability for a young couple to find a home in Annapolis is a challenge. But with rental units that are of this size, these aren't large at about 1,500 square feet per unit. The market.
That's bigger than my house. That's very large.
Well, you're on a boat today, so I mean, you're used to small spaces. But my point is that this provides an opportunity for people who, don't need a 3 or 4 bedroom traditional home to get into the Annapolis housing market on a rental basis here at what I feel is a reasonable number as compared to the expenditure you would need to for single family traditional home. So these buildings and others like it, I think, are really a great opportunity for the city to start to fill that middle ground. This isn't high by any measure, but it certainly isn't, it's not, this isn't subsidized housing or anything like that. It's a great.
Would you consider it workforce housing? I'm just trying to understand because people are constantly pressing me on this. So does this really constitute workforce housing?
Well, I think if you worked in the city and 2 people with a good income could certainly go into that place.
Do you have any idea what these units will sell for?
Well, they won't sell, they'll be for rent. And so
okay.
the rental component of this is really up to EJ and figuring out what the market's doing. If there were more of these, they would be less. So
no, I get it. I'm all for trying to make sure we have affordable housing, but this I just want to establish that this market rate housing, this isn't quote affordable housing.
No, it's market rate for sure.
Got it.
Sure. It's market rate for smaller houses.
And the last question I had, it was really along the lines of what Alex was talking about. It shows in some of the artist renderings, like basically the tree lawn, but then in the plans, it looks like they're street trees. Can you clarify where the trees are?
This is the accurate depiction here. When I do mine, I'm just kind of trying to get the building figured out and set it on the site. So we took some liberties. That's why we included these at the end, because these are the most clear depiction of what we see happening with the site.
Great, thank you.
What age are these trees as illustrated?
These are illustrated not at a particular age, but they are shown as mature.
So mature is 15 years and older?
Well, yeah, these are probably 40-year-old, 30 or 40-year-old trees.
40?
Kind of depicting the mature look of this landscape.
Did you 40? Is that what I heard?
Yeah, I'm not. We didn't try to depict a certain age. We just tried to show what like a mature planting might look like.
And a mature willow oak is about 35 to 40 years.
Yeah, and they live a long time. Right?
Yeah.
So as you see in Annapolis, they're definitely trees that can live over 100 years.
But they're slated to go in at 4 inches at this point.
Yeah,
right?
4 inches, so that that they'll go in at about 20 feet tall.
Yeah, these are not small trees.
And what's the height of the building, Leo?
Well, that's a great question. I think I'm about, let me go back to my section and see if I can tell you. I think I'm probably about 24 feet, give or take.
Okay. 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 So it'll be within 10 years that these things leaf out and begin to look like real trees. But I'm trying to get some, I'm trying to visualize into the future. Not always easy.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit of a trick. We do these renderings to try and illustrate what we're trying to achieve here. It's always easy to get caught up in what the first swipe of these things looks like. They get planted and they have to grow. But, we're going with 4-inch trees here. My building, actually, Andrew just texted me, is actually 20 feet tall. So, I mean, if these trees are going in at 12 feet, I think it'll be a really nice blend in terms of its first appearance. And the ground cover and most of the planting that's low will be, fully developed and
right.
like this in as little as 3 or 4 years.
Yeah. Okay. Okie dokie.
Is that all?
It's all for
That's
me.
all for our presentation.
It's all for your presentation?
Mr. Chairman, yeah, I do want to just get clarification from Tammy, if I can, on our exhibit list. I think last time we did it as Exhibit A, and then 1 through, I think we had 9. Can we just confirm that our exhibit package was accepted and numbered the same way?
Tammy, can we respond to that for getting the numbering system right for them so they know which exhibit's which?
That's correct. It's A1 through A9.
Okay, great. And then when Kevin sends a letter from Brian Adams to the commission, are we going to treat that as a city exhibit? I don't know what number we're on.
We're going to be at C2 for that.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And I did already email that while the presentation was going on. And then you also received a public comment letter from Ms. Trudy McFall, a positive comment about the project, and you should have received that.
Yep.
Yes.
Great.
Yeah, she's a tough grader, and the fact that she spoke positively was nice to hear.
Yeah, I think I think it's good to hear positive comments. If you're going to give other ones, you need to give positive ones when they're deserved. So that was nice.
Okay.
There was no other comments.
All right, so we've got, we're still in the presentation, ending the presentation. Any further questions from the commissioners of the presenters at the moment?
It's maybe not so much a question, but of course, you knew I was going to make a comment about the bike rack.
Of course, I already said that. Can I make the comment for you of why is it so far from the front? Is that what you were going to say?
Not really. I mean, it's a similar sentiment, but not that comment. I mean, I think that it doesn't do any harm there. That's what the stand. If you were just going by the manual and you're flipping through the manual and it says bike rack, that's what you do. If you want to put something, and I guess you get some lead points for, non-auto facilities or whatever. But if you wanted to do something that would actually be of value to people who might live there, what I would suggest is in the back, like just behind the nose of that Porsche, where the brick is to put a hose, like a hose that you could use to wash a bike off. So chances are, if a person's living there with a Porsche, they're probably going to have a $5,000 road bike, and they're going to go out for a ride on a rainy day, and they're going to come home, and they're not going to want to take this nice, dirty bike into their back deck and take it into their living room and haul it downstairs. They're going to want to clean it off, and they're not going to want to put it in their shower, which some people do. So what would be really nice, I mean, a really nice amenity is to have a spigot there, and you buy a stand from dero.com. They make stands that have, attached tools, and you hang your bike on there. There's a pump. And so you come back, you wash your bike off, and then you take it inside, because there's obviously no garages here or whatever, but chances are somebody's going to want to do that. And that hopefully they get you the same kind of lead points. And you provide something for, a couple $1,000 bucks, you provide something that could be really nice for somebody living there. I mean, if I were looking at a place like that, I'd be like, wow, that's useful. I like that. So that would be my suggestion. You could leave that rack there. If you were living there, chances are you're gonna, if you have just an around town bike, you're gonna pull it and leave it on your deck. And so I would also recommend that you have something there that you could lock it to, a rail, could be a metal railing or something. But so that, you just lock your bike there so nobody steals it overnight. That's another like just very minor thing, but if you, without a place to lock it, then you're, something to lock it to, then it's just not useful to put it back there. So couple little suggestions, don't really change much, doesn't really cost much, but adds a lot of value to somebody living there who, might like to ride a bike. And, I think the target market for this kind of arrangement is probably somebody who's gonna ride a bike. It's my guess.
A $5,000 bike that they might shower with.
Trust me, if you have a $5,000 bike, you take it in the shower with you. And
Gotcha.
usually you have a double bed so you can have it on the other side of the bed.
That's coming from the commissioner talking from her $200,000+ sale, but maybe not now it's used, but come on. I appreciate it. Leo, my mother always told me if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. So I'll just say what somebody else is saying over my shoulder while I was reviewing these real quick. But before I even say that, if this was approved, how much could what I'm looking at architecturally, visually change by just on the outside shell from the approval to when you actually build it? How much could you legally change and make it look different from what we actually see here?
Gosh, that's a good, I mean, I'm not sure where you're going with it though. That's the problem.
Well, then I'll just go into what people were, I was reviewing these plans this past week and people over my shoulder go, oh, is that some new dental offices going in somewhere? Is that like a dialysis building or something? I said, no, this is going to go in West Annapolis's residences. And the immediate comment was, why would I want to live there? I'm like, wow. And that was about 3 people looking over my shoulder. I was like, you got to be kidding me, man. And but I see it. It's a box going in West Annapolis and where we want to create a village feel. And me personally, I mean, I guess I don't have the right to say it. And maybe the applicant wants this building. It's not Leo wanting this, but it just seems to be another box going in with the rest and it's not really a transition from those dental offices over there, which I've gone to and have my teeth yanked on, a transition to a living quarters, but it's more of the same of that. It's almost like we're waiting for the zoning to change so we can just quickly translate it into dental offices. I don't know. That's my initial take from people that were standing over my shoulder.
Right. So let's take this down a little bit. So, I've been here more times than probably most, and when I do buildings that look like traditional, I'll call it coastal architecture with a gabled roof form, the comment comes back to say, well, it looks like everything else you do. And so now you have this to look at. And now the comment is, well, it doesn't look like the other things you did. So look, variety is the spice of life. I mean, there are certain people that are drawn to a more urban architecture. And I think, you're seeing it in the periphery around the city where, the buildings are changing character from what, the village atmosphere over on Annapolis Street is to what's happening, along West Street, let's say. Where
this is more of a millennial village atmosphere, I guess, because you walk into an Apple store, everything's boxy, it's bland, it's not very interesting.
Yeah, but people love it. I mean,
that's what they want. I get it.
Around those stores, and I think that at the risk of sounding like I'm not, basing these decisions on historical, precedent, I think it would be good for areas like West Annapolis to take on a broader kind of sense of what, the architectural styles can be. And so you're starting to see it in some of the buildings over there, but, it all doesn't have to look the same. And this one provides a great opportunity for, this, because of these areas in front of the building and along the street are so large, it's really a garden kind of atmosphere that's created with a contemporary building. So if we were doing this in, other small towns, I think it would be received differently. This is supposed to be a village, and I think that this type of architecture is conducive to that, and especially with all the openings on the front. I mean, I can really make this feel like a really, these will feel like elegant places, I think, even though they're not large because of the way we do the window patterns. And that's very hard to do with a more traditional architecture. So I would argue that, the proof is in the pudding. I think once you see it three-dimensionally, it will feel different to you. That's just my opinion.
I think if I were in the living room, I would feel exposed.
Well, you're not supposed to walk. Well, I won't say that. I think that the ability to open those up during the day and get light back into that unit would be really quite nice.
Well, it takes a lot of different buildings to satisfy our very diverse public. And this isn't one that I like, but if West Annapolis has no problems with it, we'll see. The comments will come in.
Rental market. So
yeah, I mean, I don't have anything really constructive to add at the moment, so I'm going to just stop talking and we'll proceed on. Any other commissioners have anything constructive to add or questions before we open up the public hearing? And we can always come back later at the next meeting and ask questions if we want.
Yeah, I mean, I live there and I like it. I agree with Leo. I think some diversity is good. And, again, like I said, Trudy McFall's a tough grader. And for her to grade it well, says something. And so.
It does.
Yeah. I don't know. I like it.
There you go. Nothing says not moderately priced with a Porsche sticking in the parking lot there.
Well, that's, I mean, actually, I'm sorry, can I ask one more question about that? And it's a hypothetical. And if the applicant doesn't want to answer that's fine. We can just move on. But I'm just curious, like, how many more units if you had more room, how many more units would you need to put there to make one of them an MPDU?
Yeah, up to 12 is the requirement.
I know the requirement, but I'm just curious from kind of an economic standpoint. I heard Mr. Hyatt say that it's not economically viable to do that. How many units would you have to get to? So like if you had some bonus that you could get to how much would you have to do to get it that you could maybe do one of them that way?
Well, I can talk to that.
I'm just kind of curious.
But I'm going to talk first. I think that, these projects are about an economy of scale, right? So we look at the other projects we brought before you over the years, the opportunity to absorb that kind of a change in terms of the financial performance for these projects is expanded. It's just really the scale of them. I mean, the city may have it right at 12, I'm not sure, but these are costly projects, particularly in Annapolis where the process takes so long and the requirements are so rigid, and there's not much opportunity to do these multifamily things in the city. It's a real challenge. You all know I've been here on other projects before. I mean, for a 4-unit building to even consider that is just not reasonable. Now 12, I mean, if I could get 3 stories and could park it, then yeah, I think we could be talking about one. But,
so do you agree that things like the minimum parking requirements are a deal killer to, say taking the same square footage and putting 5 units instead of 4, if you had relief on the minimum parking, would you do that? Make them slightly smaller?
Well, I think it's a balance, right? Because, I think you have to think about what the other neighborhood residents want. They want you to make sure you're taking care of your parking. I think we're going to find as time goes on that the parking requirements drop lower and lower, and they should. I mean, not everyone's going to have 2 cars. And not everyone's going to rely on the ability to get in a car to go to work. If you think about the whole process of, smart growth, if there was more density in places like Annapolis, then there would be less necessity to drive cars. And that's what drives the parking count down. And if I can get bigger buildings with less parking requirement and less environmental requirements, perhaps, but once you get to a certain scale, then these moderately priced dwelling units are an integral part of these developments. And, we looked at this like over in Eastport. So, but then there's resistance to these larger structures. But you know as well as I do that the health and vibrancy of cities like Annapolis will rely on getting more people to live here at a more moderate price. This is not, these aren't $1 million homes here, right? And so those are the killers to this density. Projects like this and others at larger scale are how you keep cities vibrant and make them grow. And then you can create walking environments with less parking. So I think we're kind of on the right track, but again, it is an issue of scale. There's just no opportunity at this scale for that.
Yeah, and I ask these questions not so much because, I'm not suggesting anything should change here, but for things that we think about, other tasks we have, reviewing legislation and making recommendations and things like that, I think it's always important to get feedback from applicants about what incentives drive them to do certain things. And that's why, you've probably noticed that I ask these questions pretty much, with respect to everything that's being brought forth, because I want to hear why the choices that are being made and what's driving them. If the answer is just because that's what we want to do, that's fine. But if it's certain parts of the code make us do this, and that drives things in a certain way that maybe we think is counter to things that the comprehensive plans say, those are things we need to hear. So that's just some context for why I was asked these questions.
Right.
But
And I think, and Alex, I also agree, and I think it's helpful to ask these questions because I too am interested in what drives some of the decisions that developers make. And in this case, I'm thinking about 1,500 square feet of living space, and I think, wow, that is a lot of space. So could they have done 700 square feet units, and then had more units? And if they're restricted by parking, that does go towards easing up or making our parking requirements more flexible. And so I agree, we can be working on that in our, as we revise the code. So I think it's important to talk about those things. But I guess my answer or my question, Leo, is, and I don't know if you can answer it or not, but if the parking requirements weren't so strict here, would you be able to do more units, say 7 units instead of 4?
Well, sure. I mean, if I didn't have to park these cars, then I could do a bigger building and I could put more people in the same amount of space, but I've got to.
Well, Leo, that's not entirely correct because we are limited based on our zoning district here, and that would be a multifamily project, and I don't believe multifamily was permitted in the PM district here. I don't think we had enough square footage, if I recall correctly.
Right. I guess I was just speaking more to, some of the encumbrances we go up against on developing projects like this. I think, your point's well taken too. The underlying zoning has limitations to how many you can put here, but also parking is a part of that too. And so when I heard the presentation of the comp plan, what I was hearing is that there's demand for residential units in the city of Annapolis. And, you've seen me here many times. You get residential units, and it's a struggle to get anything that's of a considerable size to go.
How many parking spaces here again?
8.
8, 2 per unit. And then is there a storage space area for people to have their leisure items?
Basement.
Each unit has a basement.
Basement, okay. And the green space area to walk your dog?
From the neighborhood.
No. All right. Anybody else?
The park that we hope the master plan will find.
That the city can't fund. You put more people in a small area that will have to go find, that can't really hang out. And there's no frontal hangout area like a porch to say hey to the public. It's more of in the rear.
No,
there is.
I'm sorry. There is.
The 10-foot patio is nice.
Yeah, there you go. That's fantastic. I got to hand it to you. That's nice.
Well,
That's really nice.
I'm going to jump on what Alex said at one point.
Nice.
I like biking. I think biking's great, and I've got a couple bikes behind me actually. But it would be nice. You're only a couple blocks away from the water too, so you might want to think about a kayak rack if you can.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the wall along the back, the retaining wall, is a nice opportunity for a rack assembly for whatever tenant decides that that's important to them.
Yeah.
Okay,
I think you might need, as long as we're thinking of the future, you might think about more than just one electric charging station.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I have to talk to my project architects here and see where we are with our lead services. And I
Pull the
mean,
conduit like you did on Hudson Street.
yeah, I mean, certainly
Just,
could.
Yeah.
I was about to say we need some more millennials on the commission to bring up millennial items, but Mr. Bob Waldman, our eldest senior member, just brought up that millennial item. Pretty much people who move in here are going to have chargeable cars, so, and bikes for that matter. Okay. Being the fact that it's very late, we have gotten through the applicant's presentation and comments from the commission back to the applicant. Now we will open up the public hearing. We do have some items submitted by the public, and we will continue to gather those till our next meeting, and we will continue to open our public, keep our public hearing open for comment until the next meeting, at which point we will read all of the inputs that we have and show them on screen for everybody to go through them and consider them at once, rather than reading them out now and then forgetting by the next meeting, which we don't want to do. So I will now keep that public hearing open, but that does conclude our agenda. Are there any other questions by the commissioners before we close out, proceed on from this item to closing out the meeting? Okay, hearing none, we will then proceed on to item F, which we had already accomplished earlier in our meeting, and then finally G for adjournment. Do we have a motion for adjournment?
So moved.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, seconded by David Iams. Thank you, everyone.
Got that one in.
All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, any abstentions? Hearing none, unanimous. The meeting is now closed. Thank you very much, everyone from the commission, also the presenters. We appreciate that, and all the members of the public who commented. And now the meeting is